The treatment has persisted for 18 months exactly. In the darkest corner of the darkest room, all I can remember is that door, bearing that damnable scar. Perhaps it's nothing shameful to attempt and fail. Why urge fate forward if I am unwilling to accept its consequences? Perhaps that which lies beyond the door isn't worth remembering. I've been almost exclusively doing Elden Ring videos for over 3 years now, which is about 1/3 of the total amount of time I've spent as a fan of FromSoft in general. And that's not just because their games are fucking fun as shit, it's also because this developer's games have a certain combat tempo to them that, once you spend too long playing them, actually start diluting and possibly ruining the experiences of other games. I'll endure a week-long footage capture binge and then suddenly get the urge to play Helldivers with boxing gloves on. It's gotten to where these games are really the only ones I can even play with a semblance of competence anymore. Of course, this is all to say, whether I'm completely correct or if I make a genuine mistake, I fucking mean what I say. I also have a Patreon that gives you early ad-free access to all my content, asset files, occasional tutorials, and even some modded set pieces you'll see in videos every so often. So if you feel like giving me money in a way that doesn't benefit YouTube in any way, then you should definitely do that. Number 262, Sky Shot. Wow. This thing is shit. I was curious as to how this worked physics-wise because I, like you, have never used it a single time, and the happiness being gradually sucked from my face as I realized the entire Ash only used one bullet would have been funnier than any joke I could have ever written. I've seen people try to advocate for it. I haven't, actually. I've seen 0 people try to advocate for this piece of shit. But in my head, some people have tried to advocate for it, saying it's good at landing headshots, but I don't think they've ever really paid attention to how infrequently an enemy's head lines up vertically with their lock-on point. Even if, absolutely still, most of them are hunched over waiting for something, or they're just positioned in a way that prevents the arrow from consistently getting the bonus. In no single circumstance would you not be better off just free aiming it via ADS instead. Oh, and the bullet has 0 tracking, so enemies that are fighting something else? Nah. Enemies on patrol routes? Nope, even that's too much movement. No, unless your target is literally in a coma, you will not hit something with this skill. And even then, you still can't be indoors anywhere because your shot just lodges itself into the fucking ceiling. You've been granted the wonderful opportunity of an unaware enemy, and this is how you carry out your ambush? Your ass deserves to lose every rune you have. Number 261, Blindfold of Happiness. It's one thing to reuse previous ideas. That's not some inherent death sentence or anything. A lot of ideas that don't really provide value can be recontextualized in situations that facilitate it. And as long as people have fun with it, they mostly just won't care. But Blindfold of Happiness makes me feel really heartbroken because you can tell at least some effort went into the casting animation, only for it to be handed off to someone else who just couldn't be fucked with the lofty task of copying their own work. Nope, they saw the FP cost and the stat requirements and just assumed that it also needs to be half as good too. Like someone during its development was actually thinking, no, we can't let unseen form get power crept. Anything but that. 15 seconds is just barely enough to get past the eggheads in the abyssal woods, and rushing around because of the shorter duration just leads to you making noise and getting caught out more often, and saving 10 FP doesn't mean much if you're a corpse. And I promise I'm gonna try not to make too many PvP points this time, that this list is way too huge for that, but breaking lock-on for other players doesn't even matter because when that 15 seconds is over, you're just gonna have to cast it again, inviting the sharpest of daggers right into your unprotected sphincter with a casting animation long enough for you to change the batteries in your controller. Number 260, Dragon Form Flame. See, what's unique about this skill is that it needs more FP than Fire Breather. Same stagger value, same poise damage, fire damage, right down to the fucking description of the skill. It's very exhausting constantly having to acknowledge that not every skill needs enough power to punt dragons across the Atlantic Ocean. I understand that some things are made to be shit for world building purposes, but I think we're finally reaching a point where we have to admit FromSoft is getting way too much mileage out of this design choice. It was funny when you gave us the broken straight sword because you already had 25 other weapons lined up for us in the safety bunker we were about to head into. But there's no punchline behind it needs more FP. It's not a shitty joke, it's just shit. And if you've been in the spotlight for so long, you feel like you can farm audience applause by farting into a microphone, then maybe we've gotten a little too comfortable with each other. Number 259, Blood Fiend's Blood Boon. I don't know the relation the Blood Fiends have with Mog. I'll probably watch a lore video on that later while I'm trying to sleep. But whatever detail in that story allows this skill to be an indisputably worse version of the one we literally just unlocked access to the DLC with, leads me to the opinion that adding in shitty items to facilitate lore is another thing we need to just stop accepting. You're not gonna convince me just lowering the FP cost of this would be vandalizing some ancient pinky promise between Emperor Comet Blast and Mother of the Fucked. Doesn't give the Blood Flame weapon buff, has painfully limited range with equally bad attack power and status, can't even travel in a straight line without slamming its nuts on the corner of the wall you were hugging, and all of that could be well excused by just cutting the FP cost in half. Like, that's literally it. Wouldn't even have to balance anything else. It would still be shit, but at least it would be fair. Number 258, White Shadow's Lure. There's nothing that personifies the utility of this weapon skill more than the sight of an invisible scarab being perpetually chased by a pack of wolves. Even the game itself tried to tell you this doesn't do shit. If you were let down by this, you have no one to blame. Since enemies are programmed to investigate every alien noise they pick up on, the same utility can be found in other incantations, consumables, arrows, and anything that makes a big enough fuss to be considered a distraction. Darkness works on most enemies even during combat. Shatter Shard arrows are great for repositioning enemies that don't want to move, and even Shadow Bait gives you more range and can usually help out with farming large crowds of unaware enemies. But the skill variant has a fixed range that lands so close to you, the intended prank victim just magically knows where you are as soon as the shadow expires. Number 257, Knowledge Above All. 35 FP for a meager 10% damage reduction versus Magic and Holy. Two damage types that are more shy in each other's presence than middle schoolers holding hands at a pep rally. And you still thought it was good enough to warrant a setback. Not even like it has a purpose. I'm sure there could have been a niche here to be explored somewhere, but Crucible Knights, Clean Rot Knights, Black Knives, Tree Sentinels, and most other holy enemies have magic defense sufficient enough to not consider magic damage a good option anyways. The only enemies with a magic defense low enough for this skill to make a difference seem to be Oracle Envoys and Black Blade Kindreds. The damage output of the two Black Blades make the added player debuff very risky to play around, and the Envoys get finger blasted so hard by everything else that exploiting a weakness rarely ever comes to mind. So I don't really know where the target is, I just know this skill went clear the fuck over it. Number 256, the Torch Attack. The Torch Attack skill falls around the same spot that most torches would on a weapon list. You're attacking with a torch. It's a torch attack. It's not ineffective, sort of in the same way trimming your hair with the jagged edge of a shattered light bulb isn't ineffective, like I'm sure you'll get it done eventually, but such a mission usually comes at the great cost of your patience and/or hair follicles. This community seems to be obsessed with the idea that as long as it can kill a rat, it can kill a dragon with enough free time. The torch attack is good insofar as it does enough damage to push you just over the line of completely helpless. It's still not better than applying the no skill ash to it so you're free to use your main hand dash instead, and it's still secondary to just buying a lantern and freeing up that extra slot anyways. It's just that you'd hardly notice since this player base's any port in a storm mentality enables half of us to usurp thrones with a ham sandwich. Number 255, Soul Stifler. The 10-second hang time of the cloud all but guarantees an aggressive target will catch a whiff of it at some point before it evaporates. That much you can be 100% confident in. But I don't think missing targets was ever really a problem with this one. Soul Stifler has three glaring issues that each play their own part in making the skill look as objectionable as humanly possible. First, the long-winded casting animation that demands an unrealistic level of forethought from whoever's using it. Second, its incompatibility with other debuffs like Shriek of Milos, Grail's Roar, Flower Dragon Bolt, Darkness, and other way better defense shred applications. And third, and the most offensive indictment, which is that it's been bugged for nearly the whole DLC and only reduces defense by 15% and not 30% as data would indicate. If it actually did what it was supposed to, maybe it could climb the ladder a bit, but until then, this is where it's staying. Number 254, Fire Breather. Breathe fire. Cool. It can stagger smaller dudes. That's about it. Number 253, the Parry. You parry shit with it. Cool. Boss enemies like Morgott and Rolana need two. Alright, that's the whole review, I guess. Cool, that means we're done with the Fs. Number 252, the Storm Kick. Has kick in the name, not boosted by Shattered Stone. Has storm in the name, not boosted by Divine Beast Talisman. Well, not completely, at least. Only the first half gets boosted. Are you just like afraid this will one day become too good or something? What archaic playstyle have I not fucked around with that makes this unique skill powerful enough to be this shy around buffs that it's rightfully earned? I don't give a shit if it's a gauntlet and therefore technically not a kick. According to the dancer's dress, corkscrewing a sword up someone's butthole is a dance in at least one culture, and that's enough to earn the boost, but suddenly that's a problem for a skill that actually needs it? Be fucked. Number 251, Painful Strike. Yeah, so I'm 98% convinced the stamina debuff on this skill just doesn't do a goddamn shit. The weapon isn't even all that terrible thanks to the innate poison buildup, and I guess the skill can hit 3 different times in a single animation, which marginally helps, but you can tell by the lack of arcane scaling the status was sort of just tossed in there as an afterthought, and that the main allure for this weapon was absolutely the unique skill. And after testing it multiple times, I have sufficient reason to believe it just doesn't do anything in PvE. I'm sure the debuff is nice in duels. You already know I don't give a shit. This motherfucker needs 24 dex. It's just a jump rope with a bunch of teeth on it. Number 250, Barrage. Now that Rancor Shot has effectively outclassed it in just about every way I can think of, this skill has given even worse results than it normally would have with the base game. 80% base damage compared to the Rancor Shot's 90, no tracking on the arrows at all, and the paper-thin hitboxes on the arrow projectiles means you can even whiff shots on a patrolling guard if your timing is bad enough and he just decided to turn around for some reason. Status buildup stays the same, but without any sort of reliable tracking, half those arrows would be put to better use trying to unclog your neighbor's toilet than lodged into the rock formation you absolutely were totally aiming at. Number 249, the Stamp Sweep. I was pleasantly surprised by the large selection of weapon classes this could be attached to. I was surprised by it specifically because I started getting desperate to find anything remotely productive or positive about this skill, and I'm still pretty sure I haven't found anything of substance. The wide sweep can create space versus groups of small enemies, which means a grand total of dick and balls because I'm 100% confident that I could spin a wheel of other base game ashes and skills and land on something with the exact same benefit and also kills shit. The attack motion value clocks in at a staggeringly ineffective 112. It would literally take less time to R1 something to death. You can put this on a fucking flail. Number 248, the Kick. You can boost it with the Shattered Stone Talisman. Number 247, the Piercing Throw. 8 FP is barely anything, and I still think it's too much for this. It's only 3 FP on the shield, and that shit gets its own unique skill, but this needs 8 because it can pierce targets, despite having the trajectory of a straight line and a hitbox size smaller than most arrows? Fuck you. This is a single projectile. No one has ever made the piercing benefit work unless they were consciously using the skill with the purpose of getting it to pierce through multiple things at once just because they wanted to see it happen. And even then, a shield of the shittiest make can still negate most of the damage even though it literally passes through the fucking shield and the person holding it. 8 FP for 3 poise damage. Get the hell out of here. Stupid. Number 246, Blade of Gold. A bit hilarious that the skill lets you hit things with the weapon hitbox, like the animation itself doesn't propel you into the sky like you're being abducted by a fucking alien. I've been trying really hard to find a single thing this skill can potentially show off to the Black Knife, but outside of cheekily scoring enviro kills with the ridiculously, quite unnecessarily torqued stagger value attached to the skill, there just really isn't anything here. 145 holy damage, even with all the extra faith scaling, is a scandalously low amount of punch for something that needs 20 FP. And 10 poise damage is just barely more than I was expecting it to have, I guess, but on something that's very obviously meant to be a damage first ability, weighing that as a potential positive just feels like I'm digging a bit. Mostly because I am. Number 245, Feeble Lord's Frenzied Flame. Can't even build up madness like it used to. And I'm sorry, but if we're sticking strictly to a PvE list of criteria here, then that may have just been the one positive it was ever able to flex. And it was definitely a bug that needed to get patched out anyways, because the madness proc being that instant means they obviously just added an extra 0 where they shouldn't have or something. But it's better than the slow crawl we get on every other Frenzy Flame ability. In fact, the only reason they haven't nerfed the build up on on the Midra incantation is because someone out there is pouring their heart out advocating for why that piece of shit is just somehow too powerful. Feeble lore tells you everything you need to know. You needn't go past the title of the skill itself to be completely confident in its missability. This thing is feeble as shit. Number 244, Egon's Drake Hunt. Repeated tests from both myself and plenty of other people at this point have yielded the undeniable conclusion that Golem's great bow with through and through winds up being marginally better on just about every account, up to but excluding dragon encounters. And with the increasingly expanding warehouse of anti-dragon combat tools the game seems confident in giving us, I'm just really not sure if there's a solid place this Ashe can comfortably fit into. Its only niche is good at shitting on dragons, and that's already blossoming into an entire genre of music at this point. Number 243, Death Flare. Okay, so it's still shit, and I still don't think players that have it in themselves to be nice to the holy projectile the skill needs 2 whole animations just to get to are arguing in the best faith. But the holy buff granted by the skill isn't horrible. I mean, speaking strictly for holy buffs, you have no reason not to go for Sacred Blade, Sacred Order, Shared Order, any other holy buff you've ever found in your life. Your county priest could jizz on the tip of a blade and still apply more holy damage, but at least Death Blight isn't the only thing it offers. And in the DLC, where everything seems to be allergic to thoughts and prayers, it's not the worst skill you could be riding up with. It's most certainly not the best, make no mistake, it is very far from the best, but I could see people forcing it to work if they wanted. Number 242, the Roaring Bash. Do you like Valorheart? What about one half of Valorheart? Well, tough titties, that's what you're getting. Merry fucking Christmas. Scales with weapon level completely. Alright, that's it for the positives. This one's actually divided into 2 separate hitboxes, one of which is considerably larger but with a slightly lowered MV of 125. You get 150 if you bop someone with the exact center of the hit radius, which I guess really isn't that hard to do. It's just kind of awkward that the outer radius is so much larger, yet the center MV only gives a marginal benefit to scoring a hit with it. Like, the full radius of this bitch is like rejection sized, and the slightly boosted physical damage on the shield itself gets put to good use, but there's no way you're out DPSing any great shield. I'm pretty sure Shield Bash on the brass shield would do better than this. Number 241, Assassin's Gambit. I can at least give this one a single positive mark for actually not pussyfooting around and giving you both stealth utilities at once. Wow, how fucking nuclear. Puts it just barely above crouching in a bush. And I don't need to waste HP for that. There's probably a speedrunning niche here somewhere this can tap into, because legging it through crowded areas like you're about to miss the bust of the doofus convention usually makes a lot of noise. And less noise means attracting less aggro, means more time you can spend not exhausting stamina. You can use it to prevent lock-on if you're looking for a PvP tip, but I don't know why I said that. There's no but at the end of this sentence. This sucks. Number 240, Moore's Charge. This skill, along with this entire shield, has always felt very confused. I'm not sure what niche it's trying to tackle here, and I've become increasingly convinced that it doesn't know either. Tying rejection to 28 pounds and 7 more FP sounds like a total brainlet move, mostly because it is, but the shield itself does enough damage to facilitate a build that uses it as a weapon. But it's not like seals even weigh that much to begin with. Half of them weigh literally nothing. So if your build is dying for some extra crowd manipulation, there's nothing stopping you from just offhanding a seal with rejection equipped. It's incredibly fun bouncing fuckers off the sides of balconies and whatnot, but in practice, I feel like I'm just forcing myself to settle for something infinitely more uncomfortable because someone on Reddit told me it worked. Number 239, Onyx Lord's Repulsion. 27 FP. Good lord. I felt less scammed from shitcoin rug pulls. This skill is Wrath of Gold for bitches. The cornerstone, the epitome, the shining example of bad but fun as shit. I think it really just comes down to pulling enemies towards you being a vastly more valuable utility. Never really understood the poise buff, because if you're pushing shit away from you, you obviously don't want it near you. So if you're getting hit by something to begin with, you probably aren't using it the way it's intended. Not counting the utility of crowd control, you're handing out 200 base magic damage for 27 FP, which that's just not gonna work, I'm sorry. Number 238, Wall of Sparks. Alright, I think I finally figured out what you're supposed to do. Well, what the game wants you to do with this one. Comparing it to just a charged R2 from any perfume bottle seems like a very accurate comparison at face value, but the charged R2 can only hit a single target up to 2 times. Wall of Sparks comprises multiple different bullet IDs that cover a wider area, and they each have a slightly bigger blast radius. This ultimately means if you catch an enemy of the obese variety hanging out and not moving for some reason, then charging up this skill right behind it will usually result result in marginally more damage than you would have done with the charged R2. Apparently it was given some of that old shared hit list bullshittery that's also used on Flamefall Upon Them for bottleneck purposes. Number 237, Through and Through. Regular arrows only get a 20% boost, so ditching great bows in favor of standard ones will always be nerfing your build a bit, but the 30% boost to great arrows isn't much better. The Ash itself, first and foremost, is literally pointless because the only infusible great bow comes with the Ash already attached, but as a skill, it's only barely worth any acknowledgement because it's the one skill that attempts to turn bow builds into damage cannons, something bow builds have been almost entirely barred from by design. It can pierce through different targets, but large enemies with multiple parts, like dragons, still seem to only get hit once no matter what. Also, can't go through shields. You get fucked, that's why. Number 236 and 235, Rancor Slash. I know it's useless to retroactively call this out, but fucking stop it. Stop using a base game animation from an Ash that was only ever kinda good and jizzing on a couple extra projectiles to it and calling it unique. It's still nowhere near as good as just grabbing a cold affinity polearm or curved sword because you're doing similar damage while hauling around twice the frostbite. The weapons they're attached to scale with dex, but the projectiles deal frostbite and only scale with intelligence, whereas the cold affinity usually just takes the same scalings on the original weapon and tacks on some extra intelligence for good measure. So that's one more point for standard weapons. It's just not good. It's not good, and needing twice the FP to execute this compared to Sword Dance just feels mean. Number 234, Sacred Ring of Light. Why all the unnecessary restrictions? I get not being able to put it on a great spear, but polearms that allow skill replacement isn't really a huge selection. It's not like you're missing that much anyways, might as well just let me slap it on a straight sword so flexibility can at least be the one positive it's allowed to have against a Halo Scythe variant. It's a weapon Ash I find a bit adorable for all its appallingly low motion values and how it constantly headbutts corners you're hugging while trying to spam. It's a weapon Ash that performs so under the status quo that it teases the idea of being a subtle commentary on the concept of projectile spam and how it may not be as fun or effective as you think. The only weapon I would ever consider tossing this on would be scythes, and the game already solved that conundrum for me. Number 233, Blink Bolt. I've seen so many different arguments for why I'm supposed to like this one, and I'm still holding fast that almost none of them have ever made sense, at least not from a PvE perspective. If range is something you want, you would either swap to an incantation that isn't holding you back, or you put the fucking star fists down and start rummaging around in your pockets for an HTS or something. I feel like weapon ashes like Blink Bolt can only come around as a result of half your game's community crucifying something you made previously because it makes the game too easy. It's really almost as if they looked at Bloodhound Step and thought, alright, now let's make it shit. Let's make it cost 5 additional FP per use, give it a pointless delay, and then lock it into a single direction. And because we found a way to introduce people to the word Fulgurous, someone will take up for it. Number 232, Contagious Fury. The shield it's attached to actually used to be a decent option before the infamous 1.14 patch that turned all the great shields into highly decorated ironing boards. As for the skill itself, I can't remember a single day since launch when players weren't vastly overrating it because they saw it in a one-shot build. Used to be a 20% attack bonus, up from 12.5. Not really sure why it needed that, since the whole purpose of the attack bonus being that high was counterbalanced by the shield being in your hand at all times. But just in case that wasn't enough of a statement, they brought out the two-handed sword talisman that gives a 15% boost to anything large enough for you to deadlift grip, which is everything, by the way. Number 231, Repeating Fire. All we were really asking for is an automatic crossbow that didn't suck, and your crippling fear of making status builds too good still managed to get in the way. Nobody would have given a shit about the long list of bosses you could one-proc with this had you not throttled the status MVs into the pavement. The people you see in forums aren't real, they can't hurt you, okay? It needs 12 bolts and 26 FP, and turning while firing feels like piloting a fucking plane. Like, just let it nuke things, it's gonna be okay. Number 230, Fan Shot. Every time I give this skill attention, I actually feel like it gets worse. It's insane to think about how many players fell in love with this bow, and specifically the unique skill it came with, only for the discourse around it to crumble into such anguish and misery as soon as modding tools were updated, and people realized it had a hard ceiling of 280% status buildup per use, despite it consuming 8 arrows at once. This is the same game that treats an aptly named rain of arrows as a single bullet, but even the spread crossbow has a similar problem where it fires 10 bolts but can only hit a given enemy up to 3 times. You guys need a fucking continuity director or something.
Rusty, that's not a real occupation in this industry.
Yeah, fucking evidently. Number 229, Thops's Barrier. Not the sorcery. The sorcery fucking slams. This does not. Thops was an impressive individual, speaking strictly on lore, but from a mechanical perspective, the only thing that's really impressive about it is its 0 FP cost. It's better than the default parry, that's for damn sure, but it's only really an upgrade in the same way switching to diet soda helps you lose weight. Golden parry gives you range, Carian retaliation blocks all the same shit this does and gives you a nice friendly trio of flesh-eating ethereal swords. Stormwall has a decent-sized hitbox that can block arrows, throwing pots, and bestial incantations. If you're just throwing this on to represent ya boy, then that's perfectly respectable. As long as I can make clear that there's an entire supermarket of parry options you would rather be using, I don't think we're gonna have a problem with each other. Number 228, Spinning Wheel. Spinning Wheel is in that awkward spot where you don't even need to look past the weapon in your fucking hands for better ways to deal status. But there's also not a clear fix that would comfortably solve the problem. Nerfing the bleed on the weapon would just make the weapon terrible, and boosting the stagger values on the skill would make the skill way too good. Obligatory I didn't make the shitting game disclaimer, but maybe this is a conundrum you wouldn't have to deal with as frequently if you didn't attach 90 fucking attack IDs to the same skill. FP related tools like Carian Filigreed and the Cerulean Hidden Tier don't really work because you'll run out of stamina long before an FP shortage even starts to become a problem, and not making it compatible with multi-hit talismans still just feels like a very personal fuck you that I'm just not really sure how to deal with. Number 227, Shield Strike. The concept of this Ash really could have went somewhere, but opening up the normal R1 chain for shields in the offhand, while not giving us rolling, sprinting, or jumping attacks, not making it boostable with Shard of Alexander, and nerfing its recovery time not even 3 main patches into the DLC, has successfully killed just about all the momentum this weapon Ash would have had. It doesn't really do anything that effectively. All it really does is tease us with the idea of something that could have been really fun to play with. And sadly, I think the recovery nerf was a pretty clear statement that whatever this skill could have been just isn't something they think is worth delivering. Number 226, the Buckler Parry. It opens up 2 frames quicker than a regular parry on a small shield, making the skill slightly more reactionary without jeopardizing the window's duration. And the total window still isn't as big as Carian Retaliation, which can be put on medium shields anyways. Stormwall can barely be found 2 minutes into the game and has a very similar window. The quicker recovery time I'm almost entirely confident is a myth at this point because I keep looking at the frame data and all the recoveries look the exact same on every single parry. So the only reason I can think of to use this would be if your playstyle was just that deeply anchored in using small shields, since if you miss the timing, you're left to deal with the Buckler's ass-moppingly low damage reduction and guard boost that could result in a particularly hilarious death. Number 225, Spinning Strikes. I understand why they're as restricted as they are. It wouldn't make much sense using both hands to helicopter a short sword the size of your forearm, but there's really no reason this shouldn't have went on the Great Spears. Or I mean, even certain colossal swords that have that two-handed hilt design going on with it. If anything, it probably would have saved it. Absurdly low attack MVs, just across the entire board. Only the heavy attack is really worth using, and it needs 15 FP to execute properly. The spinning motion can stunlock smaller dudes, provided the hitbox doesn't fly clear over their head, and I suppose the repeated hits with no expense to status buildup does give it a comfortable niche on poison and blood and even occult affinities. But being restricted to only a couple weapon classes combined with lower than average MVs means it just needs way too much help for it to be a mainstay. Number 224, Mists of Eternal Sleep. Man, every single sleep weapon in this whole game just struts its talents around like a student driver in a U-Haul with 2 flat tires. How the fuck does not a single sleep weapon have proper arcane scaling that complements its sleep buildup? Eternal Sleep is way more efficient, but only against enemies that are already aching for a nap, and I think a lot of us forget how niche the sleep status really is just because it happens to be a reliable way to deal with some of the game's most bothersome encounters. It doesn't matter what variant of sleep you're funneling. If they can resist it, it's just gonna force the same stagger animation it would have normally. And at that point, you're better off just using the regular Saint Trina sword, because Eternal Sleep gives new weapons an excuse to have lower buildup for just no reason. Number 223, Lightning Slash. Wow, you made lightning look like shit. Impressive. Splendid work even. Lightning Slash used to be one of those low B-tier weapon ashes that people felt mostly indifferent about on the game's release, and because we had very little expectations, as long as it shot lightning and looked pretty and gave us a buff, most of us just didn't really care. 16 patches down the road, and this remains one of the only vanilla weapon ashes that haven't been given any significant adjustments. It takes over 1.5 seconds to properly execute with no help from hyper armor. The FP expense is triggered by the stance you take before you bring the weapon down, which is a massive problem when anything with more gusto than a Boston Terrier will have no problem knocking you out of it. Just fix it, okay? That's my advice. Fix it. Number 222, the Madding Spearhand Strike. It's very fitting that Madness builds have a variety of skills, weapons, and incantations that require leveling completely different stats to a borderline nonsensical extent. That's not me making a joke. That's me bemoaning the very real and likely possibility that there being no proper way to optimize yourself for a Madness build was completely intentional just because some cunt thought it would be thematic. Stop making Madness equipment level with intelligence. Just stop it. There's no need for it. It's a PvP exclusive status that's still uncomfortably hard to land on most NPCs, and the stackable attack buff it gets will almost always be a result of you giving the status to yourself, relegating this weapon and the skill to pocket warmer tier. It has enough characteristics that make it hard to use already. Is the intelligence benchmark just supposed to be a hiccup or something? You removed this from the Sword of Night and it actually made sense, but this gets to stay? Number 221, Fires of Slumber. The latest and greatest advancement in sensory technology. Some asshole made fire that puts you to sleep. Wow. This one is curiously designed. I always assumed the inflicting of sleep was the whole reason the fire itself did no damage in the first place. There would be little point in Benadryling someone just for the same lingering hit bullet to deal damage and jolt them awake again. But now with the addition of Eternal Sleep, enemies can be thrown into such a deep sleep that inflicting damage on them just doesn't wake them. So how ungrateful am I being here by just asking you to, like, fix this? Just put damage on it and make it Eternal Sleep. Because I know you can. I'm honestly very surprised there wasn't some Eternal Sleep Torch asset found in the DLC's cut content. Like there's no way you didn't at least consider it. Number 220, Ghost Flame Call. Well, ask and you shall receive, I guess. Some of you probably remember taking the piss out of how the scaling on the Death's Poker worked, and drawing attention to how weird the unique skill felt specifically when building around the Greatsword, which is, you know, something that shouldn't happen. Point is, I'm not sure if I should interpret the creation of this weapon ash as a threat to my safety because there's a non-zero chance my ass is responsible for it. If you thought Ghost Flame Ignition handed out too much damage and you like the idea of needing 2 whole point-blank hits of the skill's heavy follow-up just to proc Frostbite on most standard enemies, then maybe it's time you start throwing your name out there and chase that programming career, because apparently FromSoft thinks you're a fucking genius. Number 219, Flowing Form. Oh, I know this pain all too well. I know how you feel, viewer. I know the fiercely painful sting of reality that comes with seeing the number 220 on the attack MVs, and then revving this up to yield only piss-poor results. That 220 feels as underwhelming as it does because curved swords have one of the lowest damage floors of any weapon type available, counterbalanced by their fast and frequent hits that are great for applying status and activating on-hit talisman effects. Upfront damage is a very rare benefit of curved swords, and it almost feels like any Asher skill meant to be heavy hitting just loses a lot of its stopping power when it's attached to a curved sword. Horn Calling, Death Flare, Rancor Slash, and I mean, well, there are 2 obvious outliers to this statement, but it's gonna be all day until we get around to ranking those, so don't worry. Number 218, Deadly Poison Spray. The Poison Cloud has a 7-second uptime for the main bullet, but the skill's hit radius also extends to 6 units when fully expanded. Alright, so not a bad start so far, but status builds already have way too much, so let's see how they fucked it up. 10 Deadly Poison buildup per tick on a bullet that's set to only hit enemies once every third of a second, clocking in at a base of 30 poison buildup per second. Wow, I can't believe I used to defend this thing. Its only other utility is granting the player character the poison state, and admittedly, if you're pocketing the Kindred Talisman with Mushroom Crown, Poison Hand, all that shit, the total AR bonus can stack pretty high, but I don't need this perfume bottle to expedite that. I've got the Coil Shield, the Tooth Whip, the Serpent Bone Blade, and I don't even need Good Arcane to just throw a shit pot on the ground. Number 217, Erdtree Slam. The only real selling point I could dig up with this one is its ability to inflict both physical and holy damage in a way that's more consistent than Golden Slam. And that's not even a selling point. If anything, just going by the math and nothing else, that tends to be a pretty clear downgrade more often than not. I'd rather have the Golden Slam's 308 physical damage at ground 0 than an awkwardly physical holy damage split that still has less total AR. The scaling of the weapon helps it out a little bit, but only enough to to bring it up to the performance of Golden Slam without really ever surpassing it. And I'm not wasting 15 levels just to close a power gap that probably shouldn't be there in the first place. Number 216, Devourer of Worlds. All I'm gonna say is, you throw a title like this on a weapon skill, it better have some fucking teeth. If you hand me something named after Marvel's Galactus, I am going to expect every mountainous challenge and towering obstacle in this game to be sanded down to the size of a parking lot speed bump. I should be able to start Ragnarok with this skill, and I'm not doing any of that with an attack MV of 200 that only allows for fire damage. You know, that damage type the weapon so conveniently leaves behind. Oh, and Faith ends up being its worst scaling too, which is really a conundrum because guess what the skill's fire damage also scales with? It does get pretty obvious that it's only meant to be used as a support utility, but that still doesn't excuse its horrible wind-up time, bitch baby poise, and 35 FP expense on a weapon that literally tells me not to level the stat it scales with. Number 215, Lightspeed Slash. As mediocre and unwieldy as this already feels, it's extremely hard to imagine it used to be even worse. Currently, the bolts of light clock in at 17% of the weapon's AR with an extra 3 flat holy damage. Charging it gives the bolts 35% of weapon AR with 8 holy damage on the side. A pretty huge step up from the skill's former routine of only scaling with player stats, which somehow made it tremendously shittier. Scaling with player stats usually lends itself to really great performance, but I guess people may have been a little confused when they saw a pair of magical greatswords pissing out holy rays of light. Fucking loonies. Number 214, Sleep Evermore. As is the case with most weapon skills that have trouble digging themselves out of the twos, Sleep Evermore is an idea that could have went somewhere if it stayed in the oven for just a couple more minutes, but it's tied to a weapon with no arcane scaling, inflicts a variant of sleep that affects sleep-resistant enemies the exact same way, and simultaneously makes those vulnerable to sleep easier than they already were to a laughably pointless extent. It makes the easier encounters even more of a spam fest while holding no benefit against 90% of the other enemies in the game that are able to shake it off, all while dealing less innate buildup because it's tied to an eternal sleep weapon. In the words of Shakespeare, fuck it. Number 213, no skill. I have one massive problem with this Ash. This is something that probably would have found its way onto a torch or a shield eventually, but I would at least like to have the choice. If you make something like this without making it one of the most flexible abilities in the game, it's just gonna feel weird and unnecessarily restrictive. Why can't this be used on all armaments? How can't this be used on all armaments? It's literally the absence of a skill. How does it take a trip to a blacksmith for me to do less with the weapon I'm using? You crammed all the unique bow and crossbow skills you could think of into the DLC, and only one of them doesn't rip ass, but this can only go on a shield or a torch? Number 212, Tremendous Phalanx. It does come up short in too many areas, but the FP cost of the Great Blades by themselves can be kind of efficient regarding stance breaking. The Great Blades on the skill are capable of 24 poise damage with 16 FP, while the Great Blade Phalanx sorcery deals 30 poise damage at the cost of 30 FP. In this specific comparison, Tremendous Phalanx does start to look kinda favorable, but comparing it to another Glint Blade Ash is where most of this crumbles. Putting Glint Blade Phalanx on a Great Spear leads to 42 total poise damage for 8 less FP, in addition to the fact that the Ash can be put on a wider selection of different armaments, and this skill being unique to a reused weapon model instead of something you can place on other colossal swords is a nice little bow on the turd-crusted Christmas present that none of us really deserved or asked for. Number 211, Hone Blade. I'm sorry, I just don't believe people were asking for this to be returned, and certainly not in the state it's been left in. Gives you a 6% damage bonus tied to a unique animation long enough for someone to tape a sign to your back that says backstab me before backstabbing you. I generally don't really care that much about anything going on in the PvP climate, but I just really feel like giving something with an animation this egregiously long a PvP exclusive damage nerf should at least be mentioned and made fun of. As for the healing mechanic, hits with this weapon will replenish only 1% of your max HP per hit, and using the skill will double the amount restored for 40 seconds. But looking at how the effect actually works, it doesn't really double the healing output. More accurately, the healing is duplicated. If you've slapped something 9 times with the axe without using the skill, you'll be restoring health equal to 9% of your max HP when honing the blade. In layman's terms, neat support utility, but absolute crap in every other aspect. Number 210, Wolf's Assault. Handling a build with this weapon feels like feeding an adolescent child with a growth spurt and 26 hormonal imbalances. The aerial sword strike scales with strength and dex, but the follow-up Frost Cloud deals magic damage and scales with intelligence, and the full weapon skill only does 160 frostbite in total if both hits connect. 160 frost was barely enough to do anything in the base game, but DLC enemies shake that shit off like someone just placed a mildly inconveniencing fan behind them and continue kicking your shit in. You can cold infuse any colossal sword and be dealing similar amounts of frostbite, and the fact that they made a VFX for the weapon buff itself proves that they at least thought of this skill giving you a persisting buff after use and just decided against it anyways. Number 209, Bear Witness. There are lots of little hidden advantages to this one, such as being able to use the skill in the left hand like you would shield ashes, the hitbox ducking comfortably under horizontal attacks, which marginally relieves it of its shitty hyper armor, and that's it, I guess. The hitbox on the uppercut attack is incredibly small and could probably find a way to miss against the fucking Crimson Chin, but the lingering flames can stunlock smaller enemies like soldiers and, that's it, I guess. Finger creepers? Use something else. Number 208, Angel's Wings. Can't suppress depraved perfumers, can't suppress the Erdtree knights that have flasks, can't stop any healing effect in PvE that I've tested against, but that 30 poise damage on the skill is going to be defended by somebody, even though you don't even have to look outside of straight sword ashes to find better kneecappers. I don't know where this misconception came from, but scythes and halberd weapons are really just not good for stance breaking. In terms of weapon classes and their inherent amount of poise damage, scythes, halberds, and twin blades fall on the lower end of the chart with straight swords and katanas, despite usually weighing twice as much. So if Angel's Wings feels like it's doing Giga Chad poise damage or something, it might just be because everything else you have equipped couldn't knock over a Jenga tower. Number 207, Carian Greatsword. The damage on it is pretty neat, but a horribly long wind-up time that demands a hefty amount of forethought makes it less preferable, combined with a severe lack of hyper armor to support the player character's knees when holding it aloft. Pretty much anything in the DLC can just sidestep this shit by complete accident, and that's if they don't cold cock you out of the animation. It's one of the many cases of something about it feeling too torqued up, so it has to be counterbalanced by turning down everything else to just an insufferable degree. I would take a 33% damage cut if it meant just a little more hyper armor, because even if I'm not doling out big damage, common sense would have you think it's a lot more rewarding to consistently land a skill than it is to hand out an open palm cheek spank of damage 10% of the time you ever used it. Number 206, I Command Thee Kneel. You know, it really sucks to see such a cool looking weapon ash tied to an exclusive weapon from a unique boss, but the force of said suckage is distinctly intensified when I can't think of a way to properly fix it. Increasing the stance damage would make it too strong against bosses and bigger enemies. Decreasing the wind-up time means no small encounter would ever be a problem for you again. The damage already seems fine for what it is, and separating the skill from the Great Axe would make the weapon and the boss encounter feel less unique than it already is, especially with Godefroy's ass hanging out awkwardly in the corner of the game somewhere. This skill is powerful enough to oppress enemies that would probably lose an arm wrestle to a snail and nothing more, which I guess is fitting enough to Godrick's character, so good job on that, I guess. Number 205, the other flowing form, the one on the hammer. I think the flowing form on the curved sword can stand out occasionally just due to its higher attack MV, but every time I go back to using the hammer's flowing form, I'm reminded of how much I like, well, okay, let me explain. A lot of its utility you just aren't going to see by comparing numbers in an Excel sheet. The 19.5 total poise damage sounds, and is, underwhelming, especially for a hammer, and the 16 FP feels a bit much compared to its cousin, but the animation throws out the hammer much quicker. The scaling and base damage on the hammer are just noticeably better, often leading to more damage despite it having lower attack MVs, and inflicting a minimum of 2 hits makes it a better tool for activating multi-hit talisman effects. Of course, all these pseudo-advantages are merely being stated to emphasize its utility over the Nox flowing sword, not to establish it as a good weapon skill. Number 204, Jory's Inquisition. Well, alright, let's talk about this one. The extra bleed tacked onto the projectiles is probably the most notable aspect about the whole weapon, up to and including its shape being modeled after a Home Depot coat rack. But it would be immensely more satisfying if all the projectiles actually connected with something without a hit duration that bottlenecked it. I wouldn't mind taking the damage and status nerf in exchange for it just feeling better to play with and being more fun. Ideally, that nerf wouldn't happen because I'm already expected to hand over 42 FP for barely 2,000 damage on an 85 Faith build if the full barrage connects, but we could at least start by turning down that invincibility window in between hits first and just, just seeing where it lands us, because I just have a feeling that's really all it needs in practice. Number 203, Carian Grandeur. Still way too easy to miss, still get flinched out of it by moms with paper bags over their heads, and still too many players defending it because they see a high number and need to be excused to the bathroom for 5 minutes. I'm really trying my best not to sound like I'm painting certain abilities with a higher skill floor as worthless or not fun, but these skills are forced to exist in the same game as Taker's Flames, Palm Blast, Gravity Bolt, Bloodhound Step, and other abilities that give you all the advantages you can find on other skills that distinctly lack any shortcoming to counterbalance it. And if I'm to make a list with over 260 entries that's at least half objective, I have no choice but to treat those skills as the benchmark. None of this means you should be crucified for liking Carian Grandeur. Like fucking, I think Family Guy is funny, okay? We all have questionable tastes in something. Number 202, Overhead Stance. Is buffing the skill itself just too much to ask or something? I feel like I keep seeing a trend that involves the buffing of other items around certain playstyles without actually taking a look at the skill itself. Ever since Rolanda's cameo got buffed, Overhead Stance feels even more out of place compared to other stanced weapon ashes. Moon and Fire Stance got a huge improvement from it. Square Off and Unsheath were already stupid by themselves, and the only benefit Overhead Stance really gives you is a chance to inflict headshot damage due to the vertical. Nope, just kidding, can't even do that. Literally just can't do it. I guess if I'm really fishing for positives, the attack NVs on the skill seem to be slightly higher when inflicting elemental damage for some reason, which marginally increases its AR on the right infusions, but like I said, I'm fishing pretty hard for positives here. Number 201, Golden Tempering. Apparently this was buffed in 1.07. Yeah, I don't remember either. The only thing I see is 15 more flat poise damage that takes the entire first half of the game and slam dunks it into a trash can even harder, and gets pancaked to a slightly less humiliating degree at any point after Altus. 100 holy damage still isn't enough to compete with Drawstring Holy Grease, but the 60-second duration is enough to compensate for most of that. There's already so much confusion behind which talismans work with it and which ones don't, and this much discussion around a unique skill that gets left in the dust as soon as I set foot in Goldilocks land just isn't worth anyone's time. Number 200, Revenge of the Night. There's just way too many variables pulling the skill in two completely different directions for me to make an accurate call on this one. It earns a welcome spot in the anti-mage arsenal due to it working against magic projectiles, and the elemental damage negation on the shield itself sort of facilitates that, but not even Scholar's Shield can save you from eating a hammer at melee range, and it doesn't even get boosted by the Curved Sword talisman anyways, despite it being a counter-attack. So the purpose it was intended to fulfill is extremely obvious, which is magic counter spam. And in that regard, you're still taking quite a lot of chip damage that really adds up over time, even with its magic damage negation at the 70s. Number 199, Mighty Shot. The Mighty Shot Ash finds itself in the very unfortunate place of being a high damage, high status ability on a weapon type that doesn't facilitate actual combat. The new DLC talismans help it out a tiny bit, the attack and status MVs look to be decently balanced enough, and the 170% status MV can elevate the power of Serpent Arrows and Dwelling Arrows to quite a hilarious extent. But at its core, Mighty Shot is just another skill that's best used when hiding in a bush while your presence is a complete blind spot to anything standing so much as a few feet in front of you, and it can't even manage to be the best at what it's supposed to do. If you're looking for damage, go with Through and Through or Rain of Arrows. If you want status, go for Barrage or the Bone Bow. Number 198, Loretta's Slash. That extra magic damage attached to this skill is really fighting for justice over there, but it's just not enough. I think it used to only scale with weapon scaling, but the extra order of magic damage on the side gives it an inch or two of room with intelligence scaling, albeit not much, not a significant amount by any means, but it is there. I've noticed it feels just a little better on the War Sickle, I would assume because of the intelligence requirement already somewhat preparing you for the scaling of the skill. Being improved by both weapon level and player stats means it'll have a high ceiling during New Game Plus iterations if you have the patience to hang with it for that long, and saying the poise buff and reduced animation time didn't positively affect it at all would just be a misrepresentation. It's nowhere near as shitty as it used to be, but it still has some work to do. Number 197, Storm Wall. Nah. I'm still just not completely sold on it. I understand the DLC brought in a lot of physical projectiles for this to hard counter, and the surplus population of perfumers makes this look very tempting, but the parry is also slightly slower to start up, which can be confusing if you're expecting the same thing as Carian Retaliation or Golden Parry, and it's the only parry ash that needs FP to perform whether or not it's actually successful. 3 FP doesn't sound significant, but if you're constantly swatting away perfumer spam just because it feels cool to do so, you can shred through FP annoyingly annoyingly quickly if you're not paying attention to it. Listen to me, what the hell am I saying? Just toss a blessed blue dew on there and you're good to go. Fuck me, just don't take any advice I give you. What the fuck? Number 196, Troll's Roar. Okay, I think I finally figured out how to use this in a way that doesn't make you look like a neuron-deficient spazatron. That initial shockwave attack does 40 poise damage all by itself without any help from anything at all. So common sense would lead to the conclusion that this is your kneecapper ability. The follow-up attack is there to cleave the heads of anyone who gets their knees crippled by the blast, and are therefore stationary. Not for the guy behind you that just got flung into his neighbor's garden. If you didn't stance break something with the initial shockwave, take your finger off that R2 before you give the wind a nice close shave and make yourself look like a huge dumbass. Number 195, Claw Flick. The equivalent of Fortnite dancing on someone's corpse, teabagging someone in Halo 3, using a fucking taunt button to win fights. This shit is both hilarious and hilariously ineffective. A lack of hyper armor and a wind-up that's just long enough to be uncomfortable in most average fights is a duo more dynamic than most comic book friendships. 30 stance damage is hard to make look bad, and we already are a few steps deep into the it's not preferred but it can work part of the list, but the range is still deceptively short. The finger even goes up in the air quite a bit, leading you to assume there's some verticality with this skill when there's just not, and there's just way too much guesswork involved in its hitbox for me to confidently say it's worth it to pull this out in a pinch. Against hyper-aggressive enemies that can't leave your ass alone, maybe, but that's about it. Number 194, Lightning Ram. This was just supposed to be a throwaway line, and now I'm beginning to think hilarious but hilariously ineffective might have casted a larger net than I was prepared for. So this shit's just weird. I don't mean the animation, I mean that the animation part's weird too, but I'm talking specifically about how it works. It has a base physical and lightning damage of 40 and 95 respectively, both of which can be improved with dexterity, which is nice, but the stagger values make me confused on what I'm supposed to be doing with this. The very first roll is set at a 3, which is enough to stagger even smaller bosses, but all subsequent rolls are only set at 1. So is the initial roll supposed to open up a short window of spammability? Should I be trying to stance break someone with it? But then why is it only capable of 6 poise damage per roll? I don't know what the optimal strategy for this is supposed to be, and if I'm honest, I kinda stopped giving a shit 2 sentences ago. Number 193, Flame Spit. If you thought the cannon of Hama was too underperforming, then try the cannon of cannon. It's a fucking cannon. FP cost isn't something I commonly complain about on weapon skills. I tend to reserve my thinking cap power for stuff like that when comparing sorceries and incantations, but 28 FP is a large investment for something that can only deal 22 poise damage, and it's not even that 22 is bad, but there have been lower entries on the list that ultimately go further in the stance break department for less FP. It's got some advantages, such as being tied to a very boostable damage type, wide blast radius, and pretty solid upfront damage, but those are all advantages I can find on plenty of other skills that don't require me to throw away everything else on my build just to try and make great shields work in a post 1.14 climate. Number 192, Devonia's Vortex. Okay, I'm not gonna pull out some arbitrary math formula for this part, even if it would be pretty funny if I did, but I'm just gonna say this as a general principle. The longer you have me hanging in the air, exposing my bare cheeks to potential aggressors, the less people should care about what your poise damage is.
But that's 52 total poise damage on a fully charged vortex.
Cool, I'm happy to hear that. Its family must be very proud. It still has a longer wind-up time than the other Vortex skill with no additional range from its hitbox, and I can still hand out more punishment on a fully charged Vortex with Ordovis's jagged orange fence post, on top of it being a much cooler looking weapon that doesn't take up half the fucking screen when I'm carrying it over my shoulder. Number 191, Regal Roar. I think the more specific talismans that got released with the DLC have just resulted in this really weird and dissonant inconsistency with a lot of stuff in the base game. Godfrey Icon not working with his own goddamn weapon is a joke most of us have already made so many times that saying it in 2025 means we just get pats on the head for trying our best, but it does receive a boost from the Roar Medallion and the Highland Axe, but none of the stomps get boosted by Shattered Stone, despite it boosting other skills in the base game, like Hoarfrost Stomp. I don't know, man, every time this skill makes it somewhere on a list, I feel like we just have to put everything down and spend an entire paragraph refreshing ourselves on what it can and can't work with. And on a skill that inconsistent, just go with Barbaric Roar on a fist weapon or something. It's just gonna be better like 99% of the time. Number 190, Alabaster Lord's Pull. The increased area area of effect really isn't as big of a deal as some of us think it is. 7 and 8.5 units really isn't a massive difference if you're using the skill appropriately, because the pull effect remains mostly the same regardless. If something is 5 meters away from you in-game and they get hit by the middle AoE of either the Alabaster Pull or Gravitas, they're still pulled in by the same amount of distance. And in fact, if they're hit with the outer AoE, the pull effect is even less than Gravitas at 4.5, making it ultimately less convenient to use as a utility while suffering from a noticeably longer wind-up and only around 20% more damage if your build supports it. Number 189, Corpse Wax Cutter. Every so often, a man must revisit his past self to prepare for the future, or something. So I was a little too mean to this one a while back, I think. It's okay, I guess. It's about as okay as most of your other options, but as a forward-firing wave of concentrated get-fucked energy, it underperforms massively and unashamedly. So unashamedly that we're counting 16 patches now, and this still gives the Black Flame debuff visual effect instead of the very distinct tinge of red that comes with Destined Death. Ever since I learned the HP burning effect doesn't go as far in the DLC as it can in the base game, I'm torn between admitting I was too rough a while back and also driving home the point that it's nowhere near as good as people probably want it to be. And honestly, at this point, I'm just convinced they left the Black Flame effect there on purpose just to see what lore explanation we could come up with for it. Number 188, Waterfowl Dance. I went through the attack IDs on this just to make sure it was as mid as I remember it being, and made a mildly entertaining discovery. When used without FP, the status MVs remain the exact same for every single slash attack in all 3 motions of the skill. I have no idea why you would even begin to consider using a weapon like this for its bleed buildup, but if you're wanting to explore that niche, then I guess you can use it without FP and just have it work the exact same. It triggers a bunch of talisman effects too, if you can get to the second flurry with your vital organs still functioning. Number 187, Stamp Upward Cut. The best thing it offers is being better than Sweep, while being completely unaware of the brain damage it's accumulated by being literally split in half. Upward Cut is fine, it's certainly better than nothing, it's slow as shit, and it leaves you open to taking damage almost every single time you use it, but the attack MV of 215 at the absolute least allows the skill to function on a league just barely above R1ing fuckers into the dirt. It's easy for most players to leave it behind because a lot of unique Colossal Swords come with unique skills that are just better, and other weapon ashes like Flame Skewer and Lion's Claw fill the weapon skill role so well that others just get lost in a fog of obscurity and mediocrity. But 36 poise damage is hard to argue against in any form, so it's got that at least. Number 186, Enchanted Shot. If you're looking for range and consider it important in the build you're running, there ain't nothing better. If you're looking for damage... Most advantages I can think of for this weapon Ash sound relatively pointless to explain at length, because every path in that discussion leads to the same destination where I must ultimately match it up against either Rain of Arrows or Rancor Shot, and we know exactly how that's gonna end. The lack of damage drop-off at long ranges I can see being useful, but the range and tracking in a PvE environment just feels like an attempt to solve a problem that isn't really there. If you need this much tracking to follow a target at range, you've already aggroed it and you should probably put those floss picks back in your pocket and start rummaging around that backpack of yours for a real fucking weapon. Number 185, Horn Calling. We've gone through about 5 main patches in the DLC as of now, and the stamina expense hasn't changed, so I have no choice but to just assume it's intentional. Much like Enchanted Shot, every advantage this gives you shares the impending fate of competing with something that travels in a straight line faster and better. The small delay that happens where the horn looks like it's groundhogging out of the floor before the actual hit makes it almost worthless versus faster enemies, and the 12 poise damage for 17 FP is a trade adjacent to being scammed, but the hyper armor of an AC 130 ensures that if you start the skill for any reason, you will finish it, without question. Number 184, Ground Slam. 46 poise damage for 14 FP is the best deal you're gonna see all day, but the amount of precision demanded from the Ash to actually get to those numbers teeters just on the line between train wreck and bullshit. Whether it's more efficient gameplay-wise to trigger knockback with the shockwave, or go all in and kneecap bitches with an almighty ass crash is kind of up to you, but just make sure not to fall in love with numbers on this one because the epicenter is very picky, and you will absolutely not be hitting multiple targets with this at any point in time. Number 183, Mists of Slumber. There's a massive gap of potential with this one that will be determined by whether you're using the skill itself to hit enemies with. If you're just using the skill for the subsequent buff, diminishing returns will have you questioning why you wouldn't just grease up a dagger or something and hand out your sleep that way instead. The skill itself, however, is capable of around 156 buildup in a single blast if both the skill and the sword hit connect, which is, honestly, I mean, that's still not really great. I remember this being much better than it was, and I can't think of any patches that would have brought it down a couple pegs or anything, so my only guess is that the Velvet Sword just makes this skill look more favorable by comparison. Number 182, Charge Forth. I've scoured acres of uncharted land, dancing on the graves of the explorers that came before me, and practically flipped over the entire planet looking for an advantage this weapon skill gives you over most others. And the one I found was actually more significant than I was expecting. Charge Forth is a frontward-facing, straightforward, bolded, and underlined piercing attack, and this can also apply to weapons only capable of doing standard damage, like the Golem Halberd and the... yeah, well, that's it, I guess. And the Golem Halberd can't normally have it equipped either since it's a colossal weapon, so if you remove it, you have no means of putting it back on. Okay, never mind then. I really did kind of think that benefit was going to pull more weight than that, but I guess not. Number 181, Shield Crash. I am not completely confident in my placement of this skill here because it's always provided me with a very mystifying dilemma. The skill itself can be put on all shields willing and able to accept it from small to medium to great, but the crash is shamefully inadequate when placed on anything that isn't a great shield. However, its overperformance on great shields could very well be explained by the fact that you are using a great shield. And even post 1.14, a great shield still has way more total AR than anything in a lighter class. So I'm afraid to give this skill too many check marks on its report card because a lot of its power is debatably carried by what kind of shield you're attaching it to. But on bleed and poison affinity shields, the multiple hits of the crash tend to come in handy no matter what, so it's got that going for it at least. Number 180, Savage Lion's Claw. This skill is a rebranded, repackaged commodity from an affiliate company that used shittier ingredients and took advantage of a more lax set of regulations in their jurisdiction to make an ultimately worse product. It feels like wielding a regular lion's claw that's been shackled and chained to the ground to prevent it from yelling too loudly. And that seems to be a really strong and recurring theme here in the DLC. It genuinely feels like the balancing team may have been afraid that some of these skills were going to be too good against too many different enemies, so they down-tune its overall damage and then forget to change the FP or stamina consumption. But there's 3 hits in total, so good for status, I guess? Number 179, Raging Beast. This could be another mildly boiling take on the channel, not nearly hot enough to be a health hazard, maybe just barely warm enough to steam your vegetables, but I think players are massively overrating the iframes on the very beginning of the skill here. Even if it provides an easy way to bob and weave in between attacks from bosses and everything in a really comfortable way, the attack MVs only top out at 160, which on a claw-type weapon is just horribly undertuned. It's still a good means of upfront damage, especially if you're looking to close distance, but if you're incorporating claws into your build, I would rather have skills and a setup that encourages bleeding before I would mobility to the extent that it looks like the camera is trying to film a fucking war movie. Number 178, Horaloo's Earthshaker. Are flying enemies not annoying enough for you? Ever wondered what it would be like to play the game with a birdhouse attached to the top of your head? Just make the same mistake I did in thinking the AoE would counter flyers. It doesn't, by the way. Even with the additional hyper armor, not having the privilege of movement for 3 seconds is a large enough window of time to get mulched by basic rank and file. So the debate is no longer whether you can get to the skill without being flinched, but instead whether you can get to the skill before death. And in the DLC, that is just not a gamble I'm interested in taking. Number 177, Sacred Phalanx. There are a lot of separate hits involved in the full ability, each of which has to go through enemy defenses, so even if that 500 holy MV looks extremely impressive, it's also the only point in the entire skill that deals any semblance of dependable damage, and that's after 1.5 seconds of being stuck in the waiting room that is the disable movement keyframe. The initial spear sweep does have a stagger value of 2, so it's likely to flinch smaller enemies, but if it doesn't, you've just stapled your character to the ground for a little over 2 seconds in total, which means you're probably in trouble. Number 176, Bloodblade. The silver lining with this one is a property apparent on most beginner spells and weapon ashes, which is a forward traveling trajectory on a moderately fast bullet. So even on its worst days, the Bloodblade isn't bad, but the damage seems to be attempting to compensate for its status buildup in a way that just hinders both at the same time. You can attach this to a Nagakiba if you want to make hitting enemies with the weapon hitbox much easier, and you'll also be taking advantage of whatever the bleed buildup is on the weapon itself in addition to the projectile. but that one single weapon is really the only way you can save it from the trash can. Number 175, Spinning Weapon. You guys ready for some fucking math?
No.
The Spinning Weapon Ash comprises 7 attacks in total, 1 attack at 70 attack MV, followed by 5 subsequent slightly weaker attacks with a 58 attack MV, and then a final attack at the very end of the skill with another 70, totaling out to 420% damage for the entire skill. The status MV are 50 on every single attack, so that's just 350 status there, and only the very last attack in the chain has a stagger value of 2, whereas the rest are marked at 1. So even if the damage and status ceiling both look decently high, you'll have a lot of trouble actually holding enemies in place to receive the full chain. And aggressive enemies, the ideal target considering the skill's lack of range, can usually just hit you through it anyways and cancel the attack. Why the fuck do I have this chalkboard in front of me? I did nothing with this. This is a pointless asset. What was the joke here? Number 174, Phantom Slash. Inherently flawed is a bit of a bomb drop of a criticism that can't really be used for anything, since even the shittiest, worst performing abilities in Elden Ring seem to have some silver lining to them. But it really just feels like they gave this weapon Ash one of the most aggressively high skill floors without even giving it a clean payoff. The range is incredibly picky to such an extent that even large enemies with enough self-awareness to scratch its ass could coincidentally reposition itself just enough to be out of range. But the wind-up time is also just barely too much, both player attacks can be parried, I guess, and the directional control being improved in 1.07 feels like it's trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist, since the summoned Phantom will move in a straight line regardless. It feels like way too much preparation and setup when I could easily get the same result out of a Lion's Claw and have it feel twice as fun. Number 173, Gravitas. Gravitas has a utility that is vastly more important than any amount of damage it can dole out. And we should be thankful for that, because the damage is complete shit. I can't really vouch for its efficiency that much, but it does offer easy access into some of the funniest ability combinations that involve crowd control and large AoEs. Putting objectivity aside, this might be one of my favorite weapon ashes, specifically because of how fun it is to explore abilities and just figure out different wombo combos that normally wouldn't have worked. It can also swat flyers out of the sky like warhawks and bats, but that doesn't make it special since it's a utility found on all gravity abilities, and spells, and Stone of Gurranq, and this uniquely obscure talent called Good Aim. Number 172, Poisonous Mist. It inflicts poison in the shape of a mist, a green mist. Let me know if you need help opening your fucking mail too. If you still have this slotted in somewhere, I'm convinced you just don't know the DLC's out. That's the only explanation left for why you're still clutching onto this like your life savings while a line of poison and poison accessories quietly organize themselves behind you, calmly waiting for you to turn around. Also, it only sticks around for 40 seconds. It has the damage buildup of regular poison and the duration of deadly poison, the worst of both worlds. No one ever brings this up about Poison Mist, but you can clearly see in the params the duration is 40 seconds. Like, I'm not talking about the buff, I'm talking about the status effect, making the damage over time impressively awful, even with detonation skills like Poison Moth Flight and TPFB. Using it on occult weapons is really its only viable strategy since you can crank up the buildup inflicted to a disgusting extent, but if you're not using this to proc attack boosts from talismans or armor pieces, then honestly just put it away. Number 171, Raptor of the Mists. Okay, so funny story about this one. I got curious if this could measure up against Vow of the Indomitable since its negation effect was twice as long. Yeah, not so. Don't do that. Don't do this. Even though the negation effect lasts a full second, the effect also activates immediately upon being hit and only giving you 36 frames of invincibility before you're propelled up in the air, compared to Vow of the Indomitable's 60. Raptor also leaves you hanging in the air for a good second or two because it assumes you're going to take the opportunity to squeeze in a counterattack somewhere, but if you're using it specifically for dodging purposes, that extra second you spend in free fall is just gonna get you killed. Number 170, Oath of Vengeance. Well, at least they put it somewhere at the start of the game. At least that happened. Oh, never mind, it needs 40 fucking strength. So, okay, let me see if I have this right. You kit bashed a sword out of 50 different rusty nail assets you already had, made it to where I need 21 strength minimum to fully take advantage of the stat boost, and the skill itself is basically just a Whole Foods version of Endure, which needs 9 less FP and can be used on anything you need it to. If I use the skill like I would Endure, I'm throwing all my FP down a hole. If I'm using it for the stat bonus, I have to play the game carrying a fucking pine tree over my shoulder. And all its benefits really just come from it luckily being glued to one of the best colossal swords in the game. Number 169, Storm Stomp. It's fast, it's flexible, it only needs 6 FP. And on the surface, it's hard to see why so many players appreciate this skill. Yet with further investigation, that doesn't fucking change. That 3-hit combo I started the paragraph with wasn't there because it sounded nice and punchy. It's because all its proficiencies couldn't fit into one sentence without room to spare. I would have rather this skill just had the backbone to compete with rejection and knock enemies backward without damage, because staggering enemies is the only reason players use this anyway. Anyone who looks at that 50 base damage and thinks Divine Beast Talisman can help it out is huffing so much of their own farts they've turned their bedroom into a fire hazard. Number 168, Golden Land. Incredibly confusing Ash that manages to do everything decently, but with no real noticeable proficiency. What's the point of mentioning the Holy Particles have more range than Frenzied Burst if the entire weapon Ash is very obviously constructed to be dumped on something close enough to lick the sweat beads off your cheek? The Holy Particles are also very bad at discerning what is and isn't a threat. If you're locked onto something and you kill it with the initial blast, the Holy Darts that spawn in just collectively decide that the poor bitch hasn't had enough and start mutilating the corpse. If you're putting this on Great Stars and going nuts over its healing effect, that's a fine strategy and all, but that sounds more like an argument for the weapon you're attaching this to and not the Ash itself. Run that bitch with Prelate's Charge and you'll never look at this again. Number 167, Lifesteal Fist. Humanoid is such a funny word in this game, it just makes me chuckle. It's right up there with Fulgurus and Moonrathil. But just like in the real world, humanoid in Elden Ring apparently has a very lax definition that can be manipulated and fucked with to your logic's content. And now with the DLC, humanoid officially just gets to mean whatever the hell it wants. You can grab Kindred Pests, Azula Beastmen, even minor bosses like Onyx Lords and Crucible Knights, but you can't grab bigger enemies. Legacy bosses like Mesmer or Melania can't be touched by it. And you can't even grab Black Knights despite them being the perfect size and enemy type to receive it. So in order of most to least human resemblance, we have soldiers, common rank and file, then gravity lords, then beastmen, then catacomb imps, then kindred pests, then Melania. Why can't I grab the fire giant then? Huh? Why not? He has 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Tell me why I can't use it on Fire Giant. Number 166, Shield Bash. 7.5 stance damage on a Great Shield is the loudest cry for help I've heard from this entire list so far. If you're after a build that can shatter femurs, you don't even need to look past other Shield Ashes. Shield Strike can be put on any non-unique shield. Shield Crash can do around the same amount of stamina damage against shielding enemies while also having multiple hits. And R1 chains on most weapons held in a single hand end up doing more poise damage over time anyways, but the stamina MV being set at 500 gives this weapon Ash a very clear focus against other soldiers and knights that also have a shield. Again, it does its job incredibly well, but that doesn't really give it extra points. It's the only thing it can do, so it better do it correctly. Number 165, Establish Order. Unfortunately, looking swag as fuck appeared nowhere on my syllabus of criteria for this list, so I'm going to have to judge this skill objectively and fairly by its degrees of competency. And in every other aspect that isn't style points, Establish Order just barely comes up short. The animations feel too long and way too punishable without any hyper armor. The damage is only really substantial if all 4 hits of the entire skill connect, which is extremely hard to execute given that the first wave is literally designed to knock enemies away from you, and if it's holy damage you're chasing, you can blow bubbles up someone's hole for like 1/3 of the FP expense. In the words of Rude, if anything, it's flashy. Or was it Reno? Which one had that quote again? Does anyone even know what movie I'm talking about? Fuck. Number 164, Aspects of the Crucible Wings. Allow me to introduce tonight's special guest, the twin blade variant of Aspects of the Crucible Wings. It exists only to cause pain, and its presence in this world upsets me tremendously. And even though the default variant of this weapon Ash absolutely slaps cheeks like a misogynist middle-aged man in a dive bar, I still just can't pretend the twin blade variant isn't here. Because it is. It's here, and it has an animation that loudly demands multiples of the attention it actually deserves. You can only score up to 3 hits with a twin blade, making it ineffective for just about everything you would have wanted to use it for. Multi-hit talismans, status buildup, the sapping crystal tiers, anything that normally benefits from fast, frequent attacks just aren't gonna work. They've personally made sure it won't work. Number 163, Holy Ground. Not exactly Terra Magica for bitches, but not exactly Terra Magica. The 17 HP regen per second plus 20% damage negation sounds like it needs the attention of a mechanic from how broken it is. But the restriction of actually standing in a circle counterbalances it quite well. But my god, this animation speed is inexcusable. I can get behind everything else, but taking 4 full seconds to perform the entire animation means you'll need every bit of that regen from the spear that just got shoved up your ass. It's about as good as regen builds are going to get, and it still needs a lot of work. Number 162, double slash. Pretty sure there's a line of code somewhere deep in the game's combat script that directly controls the animation speeds and makes them 20% slower only when they absolutely need to connect in some dire situation. Every time I try to use this, I just feel like I'm settling for a clunkier alternative to Ashes with higher proficiencies in the same areas. Only the final 2 attacks in the chain can stagger even common enemies, and I don't mean each sword slash in the second input, I mean the 5th and 6th weapon hits in the entirety of the skill. The stamina consumption rivals the horn calling for most ridiculously exhausting physical activity if all 3 inputs are used, but it seems like good recovery and combo ability are everything this needs for people to think it's good apparently, so whatever. Number 161, Golden Parry. The slight reach on the parry hitbox actually feels pretty comfortable against mid-sized enemies with big weapons like Knights, Omens, and the Great Axe Exiles in Stormveil. The additional distance gives you the benefit of being out of the way of any potential damage if the parry is unsuccessful. At least I think that's how I'm supposed to be using it. That's the only reason I can think of for why the parry window is 60% the size of a normal parry on small shields. Holy shit. The extended reach also means you can potentially parry multiple enemies at once, slightly easier if you're fishing for style points, but the parry window being shortened to such a noticeable extent just feels like an effort to counterbalance it that accidentally tipped the scales way too much. Number 160, Last Rites. Last Rites by itself is a nice skill to have during dungeon crawling expeditions if you haven't had your fill of skeletons and repeat bosses, but being an aura buff means directly competing with some of the best buffs in the game, such as Rallying Standard, Golden Vow, and even the Shared Order Ash of War, which is functionally just this with a smaller dick. But this and Shared Order are very obviously pointed in the direction of eliminating undead threats as quickly as possible, which is just never going to be as universal as a build that uses FGMS or Golden Vow or something similar. It feels like its only major advantage reinforces the idea that undead bosses are built to be annoying and repetitive on purpose, specifically to give these skills some extra security in the lineup, but that's just tinfoil hat Rusty having a good time, I guess. That 10% damage buff still carries over to spells and other consumable items, so I guess I can't shaft it too much. Number 159, Cow Tower's Resentment. I guess it's decent enough when it comes to clearing out rooms of small mobs you just can't be fucked with because you're late to Monday's meeting or something, but this skill really just drags its ass when it comes to even the most basic bosses. 320 holy damage is, well, I mean, it's obviously not substandard. We're way too far up the list at this point for any of these to be considered bad in any magnitude, but it certainly asks for more than what it's willing to give. It requires high investments into both intelligence and faith to be optimal, despite us being 6 patches deep into the DLC and this shit still doesn't work with Godfrey icon, and Shard of Alexander only affects the downward strike of the weapon itself, which is pointless. If your build facilitates it, you won't need to even think about any other weapon. But if you're at such a point, I'd wager you're also waist deep into Journey 85 and you're just not watching this video. Number 158, Corpse Piler. I can't properly describe the wave of elation that washes over me when I get to talk about anything related to this weapon and how distinctly, satisfyingly left out it's become over the years. 440% status buildup on the entire moveset of the skill. You can actually get more status on a standard R1 chain on an LGS. The stagger value on every attack except the final 2 hits is a greasy old 1, which means the only thing you can hold in place to take the entire barrage is well, nothing. That line was supposed to end with a joke or something, but it wouldn't have made sense regardless because a value of 1 literally can't stagger anything. Fucking rats, maybe. And it's still a bleed katana, so no matter what flaws and malformities I relentlessly pull out for everyone to see, it still works good enough. Number 157, Rancor Shot. Having a 90 for your attack MV that fires this fast is just about as good as you can get for bow skills that aren't Rain of Arrows. And I'm only reminding everyone that being this far up the list when you're associated with the bow subtype is a skyscraper of an achievement. Status builds get even stupider than they were with Barrage. The extra damage compared to Barrage's 80% power gives it an avenue to perform even without status, and the tracking combined with the apathetic bullet speed means even targets capable of dodging are gonna get smacked stacked over half the time anyways. 75% build-up per shot is actually down from what it used to be, and it's still favored among bow builders. Number 156, Witching Hour Slash. At this point, I'm just glad Godfrey icon actually fucking works. Complaining about the long wind-up time when charging it, or how the attack hitbox is only vaguely represented by the skill's visual effect, is for privileged, ivory tower, crypto-shilling vacuosos that shoulder barge through the entire DLC with bitch boon ritual. Those of lesser status out here might as well have their L2 button bound to a shock collar. That's the highest praise I think I could ever give to this skill. It works. It works with all the right talismans and tiers, does what it's supposed to, and I guess that's just okay. Deal with it. Number 155, Romina's Purification. The additional hyper armor from 113 did it some obvious favors, but with such low buildup for a status that can't even scale with anything, I'm still running into way too many problems. You are just never going to hit anything with the entire skill and the butterflies it leaves behind. Like, it's just not gonna happen. If somehow that were able to land more consistently, the total buildup not even scratching the 200 mark still doesn't really sound like it would be worth committing to. Both polearm swings combined can deal around 400% total poise damage, which sounds nice, but since we're working with a halberd here, that's still just 22. The alternate R1 halberd chain seems to perform well enough on its own, even with inflicting status, unfortunately relegating this skill to the style points category, and I'm not sure if it'll ever be able to come out of it. Number 154, Vow of the Indomitable. I mean, better than dying, I guess. There's always been a pretty comfortable space for this weapon ash for first-timers who walk through a fog gate not knowing what to expect, and having a full second invincibility cheat code you can just slam down on the table at will nullifies some of the game's most ridiculous attacks, like Vanilla Radon's Meteor Dive and Melania's Waterfowl. Well, one part of it, at least. You're flagged as dodging in this animation, so everything just goes right through you, even disabling Melania's self-heal in the process. Not the worst way to spend 20 FP, I guess, but that's still like 5 Karian slicers you're just pissing right into the sink. Number 153, Bubble Shower. Wow. This was already taken straight to the animal clinic for a nice neutering, but I hold a unique indignation for Bubble Shower here, because I continued to underestimate just how egregious the nerf was right up until I was in the middle of recording the fucking VO, forcing me to retroactively renumber like 60 of these entries just so I could have room for how shit it was. Funnily enough, it can still shred fat immobile enemies like Placidus Axe and even Furnace Golems if you're built for it. If a target is physically inert to such a helpless extent that it allows you to say a nice little prayer or something before actually performing your attack, allow me to introduce to you an extensive retinue of casting sticks calmly waiting for you to realize how much better they are than your bubble-blowing double baby butt trumpet. Number 152, War Cry. Some skills get left behind marginally due to things like power creep or just negligent balancing, yet still do enough work to fulfill a specific niche. Then there are skills that get so smothered in the dust clouds of its competitors that it's rendered DNF before the race even fucking starts. War Cry is turned into a mere afterthought thanks to Braggart's Roar and its healthy salad of special effects and buffs that barely even need to compete with War Cry's 7.5% attack boost and 5 strength points. It doesn't lock you in place for a few seconds, but War Cry is also considered a weapon buff and gets rid of greases and other spell buffs like Order's Blade and Electrify Armament as soon as you activate it. From its duration to its flexibility to its overall benefits, Braggart's Roar is wholly designed to make you forget this weapon ash was ever in the game, and it works exactly as intended. Number 151, Poison Spearhand Strike. I think I've used this fist for every single purpose I can think of except for the skill that's attached to it. I would sooner keep the weapon in my inventory somewhere just to take advantage of the stackable attack bonus. The Spearhand Strike is one of a vast library of ways you have at your disposal to inflict poison, and in terms of speed and efficiency, it falls just barely behind actually using the R1 chain of the goddamn weapon it's surgically attached to. Number 150, Bastard Star's Nebula. If you find this one lacking compared to the wing variant, but you're not sure why, it ultimately comes down to the hit duration of the bullets that get thrown out. Wing of Estelle's Nebula has its bullets tied to a hit duration of 0.3, which means every 0.3 of a second, the same enemy can be hit by it. Comparing this to 0.8 seconds on the Bastard Stars, and it's suddenly very easy to see why this one tends to come up short most of the time. The Nebula on Bastard Stars is more capable when it comes to poise damage, but most of that is just because the skill involves you hitting something with a flail, and flails innately have really high poise damage. Number 149, Golden Slam. I had this a little high higher, but decided to test it again on the whim, and the damage is just so much lower on this than I remember. Golden Slam is a little stance break here, a little damage there, a sprinkling of knockback utility in crowds, and a tiny bit of extra damage as a reward for accuracy. And it just results in this complete amalgamate of a weapon ash that does just about everything decency without declaring any obvious proficiency. You want knockback? Morse Charge, Onyx Repulsion, Wave of Destruction. You want a hard counter to Undead? Shared Order, Sacred Blade, Last Rites. How about holy damage? Goldbreaker, Wave of Gold, Light and Darkness. I mean, it's hard for me to hate Golden Slam because a poise damage of 36 is at least a small indication that it's really trying its best. It's just that a bunch of other candidates with twice the qualifications just happen to arrive at the same job fair on the same day, and that's not really Golden Slam's fault or anything. That's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes, you know? Get over it. Number 148, Rolling Sparks. Being tethered to a largely disappointing weapon subtype that needs an entire build around it hyping it up isn't really a setback of the Ash, but the more I default to that argument in cases like these, the less I feel like it matters. Like, it's still not great. It still has a niche that's very specialized against gigantic enemies, and even then, that's still just not enough sometimes when the dragon you're fighting is suddenly in the mood to do some cardio exercises. The weapon Ash's value is entirely dependent on how many consecutive hits you can land with it, which ultimately comes down to how thick your target's ash cheeks are. You can get some great damage out of it if you pay attention to attack telegraphs and nail something when it's taking a breather, and therefore not moving, but in most situations, it's just gonna hit 1 or 2 times, just enough to say it did something and then disappear with 14 of your FP. Number 147, Oracular Bubble. Had a really hard time seeing what was so great about this one since each bubble only roughly deals around the same damage as a basic R1, and the overall DPS still gets aptly surpassed by a standard R1 chain, so much so that the distance the bubble can reach is really the only obvious advantage. Granted, you can cast it repeatedly while walking around a little, but the downtime in between casts is just enough of a problem to make me feel like this isn't really built to be spammed at things. If you're looking for spam, you've got the dinner plate of light ready to go for half the FP anyways. Number 146, Zaymor Ice Storm. If it's the sorcery we're contending with here, then the sorcery is probably going to win out almost every single situation you can use it in. But if you have this in your loadout specifically for Frostbite buildup, the two will actually inflict the exact same amount because the weapon skill uses the exact same effect ID as the sorcery. The total buildup can max out at 400 depending on whether or not your target is mentally jammed enough to stand there and take the full blast, because the stagger values sure as shit don't feel like helping out, and the damage from it is really only worth it if you're sure you can proc the status on something, which is just a big ol' fuck no versus anything big enough to be a mini boss in a cave somewhere. Number 145, Goldbreaker. Willing to give this one a high 5 for style points, but as soon as your feet lift off the ground, there are just way too many extenuating variables that go right up in the air with you. The arc trajectory your character travels is a fixed distance, which ends up being a bit of a problem because you should ideally be hitting something with both the hammer and the AoE, since it's basically another R1's worth of damage and poise. The AoE is very uncomplicated and not hard at all to hit something with. I think it takes more brain power to avoid hitting a target with the AoE, but at roughly 3 times the damage of a standard R1, 26 FP is a price gouge if I have ever seen one. The total damage is debatably worth it if you're landing a hit with the hammer and the AoE, but even then, the distance you travel makes it feel incredibly awkward in any context that isn't an opener attack on a completely unaware group of targets. Number 144, Flame of the Redmanes. Freya's greatsword is really fighting for its life to save as much as it can about this weapon ash, but the poise damage was always the main allure for this ash before it got a nice sledgehammer to the kneecaps in 1.08. The upfront damage was never really its specialty, and boosting it only feels like lip service to the notion that they're still paying attention to shit they nerfed in the past and still want everything to be equally viable within reason. But it only serves to put even more weight behind the stark reality that this skill is just never going to operate at the level it used to, and that's honestly, it might be for the better. Number 143, Wave of Destruction. You know how they say smelling burnt toast is a sign of a stroke? Well, this is me sticking 2 baguettes up the nostrils of my channel's future and lighting them like a pair of exotic cigars. I gotta be really careful with how I argue this one, because being a secondary, more well-balanced option in the face of fuckers' flames would still ideally place you somewhere in the top 100 at least, but let's think for a minute. The S this weapon receives in strength scaling propels this colossal sword into a league of its own when properly built for it, to such an extent that it ends up contending with and even surpassing the damage of most DLC weapons. The motion values of this unique skill in particular tell a completely different story, reaching up to a total of 255, which is only moderately impressive, and a total poise MV of just over 23, and that's if you're scoring a hit with both the shockwave and the weapon, which is It's fucking garbage. Like, I'm sorry, that's just pathetic. The bullet hit radius is another of its deficiencies, measuring in at exactly 2 in-game meters, I guess this is meters, which is often just barely enough to not even tickle the toes of most flying enemies. So there goes one of Gravity Magic's best utilities, just completely ignoring this weapon skill outright. 25 FP is, it's not expensive, but it's not exactly a bargain bin price tag either. And when looking at all its parts in a single picture, it becomes really hard to vouch for this unique skill in any way that doesn't involve glamour and style points, the one thing of which it proudly owns fuckloads. Number 142, Spectral Lance. Spheres and halberds deal 5 base poise damage per one-handed light attack, and since the Spectral Lance has a poise MV of 500, the most poise damage you'll ever be dealing with it is 27.5 when placed on a Great Spear. I don't believe the size of that number should be undermined, especially considering the tolerable animation speed, but if you heard 27.5 and your internal dialogue went, "Are you shitting me?" then no, I am in fact not shitting you. I do not shit. I am merely suggesting that you're one dedicated shopping spree away from eventually finding something that gets the job done marginally quicker. Granted, the 9 FP cost is substantially cheaper than most of what you'll find, and the nearly 3-to-1 ratio of poise damage to FP I think is the largest reason so many players remain attracted to it. Number 141, Spear Call Ritual. Anywhere between 4 to 6 consecutive hits starts losing a lot of its consistency when each direct hit deals 6 poise damage. That gives it a ceiling of 36 total poise damage, which is enough to kneecap most basic enemies instantly from full. I just wish doing that much damage in practice didn't feel like getting my fortune read. And the reason breaking an enemy stance from full poise is so important on this skill is because firing it into a group of incognizant mobs playing cards or some shit is the only way you can perform it with any reliability. They boosted the animation speed by nearly 50% on this at some point, and that's still a 1.5 second wait time with no hyper armor before shit starts happening. Number 140, Moon and Fire Stance. Shit, I'm not even halfway done and this bitch is tickling the 40-page mark. Alright, Rusty, brevity is a soloist. Let's go, let's do this. Moon and Fire Stance. 3 sentences or less, let's do it. Ironically, a quality affinity weapon that doesn't bear too much quality. Leveling Intelligence doesn't increase fire damage on the offhand sword, and leveling Faith won't increase the magic damage on the main hand sword. So unless you're hankering down and bolting through Journey 563, you'd best skip this weapon skill and this weapon entirely, because something extremely important ends up getting left out no matter what. If fuck you was a starting class, this weapon would probably be its centerpiece. Number 139, Poison Moth Flight. For 7 FP per use, you have to try pretty hard to cock things up, and Poison Moth Flight is certainly not guilty of that or anything, but even with TPFB asking for twice as much FP, I'm really struggling to find a proper reason why I should continue using this. The detonation effect for TPFB works on both Poison and Scarlet Rot, and allowing Scarlet Rot to be detonated in the first place usually gives you like 70% more damage than the former. The verticality lets you have fun dodging dumb shit from basic enemies. The attack itself does way more damage. I don't know, I mean, Poison Moth Flight is still good for what it offers, but it's hard to ignore the power creep on this. Number 138, Hoarfrost Stomp. And as soon as I start subscribing to the theory of FromSoft being afraid to make shit too good, they go and make more Frost Stomp that completely, unapologetically exceeds anything this skill has to offer. The fast animation time and wide fanning AoE still makes it average, at least, since you're still able to spam it for a good couple seconds until the game gets mad at you and the imaginary ref starts blowing the whistle, and any debuff that involves max HP in any way is only stronger now since the DLC's bullet sponges have made their way into the rotation. So that's another couple points for its Frostbite buildup. Really, the only major advantage it has against the Divine Beast variant is that you don't need to go to the trouble of duping remembrances just to get it. Number 137, Horn Calling Storm. Every time I find a dummy to test this on, it continues to feel weaker and weaker without any proper reasoning or cause. My only explanation is that I fell so ass backwards in love with how it looked that a worm in my brain fired off the exact combination of neurons needed to convince me that this weapon skill was just sitting on the top shelf of King Clusterfuck's supermarket, and it's about time I redirect some of the momentum that I've mistakenly given it in past videos. The base damage on this is far from optimal considering the stats on other curved greatswords, and yes, the damage of each swing of the skill does tend to add up to quite a large number if you're chaining all 3 of them together, but committing to the full sequence is really the only way you're gonna see your damage ever get that impressive. 57 poise damage as a grand total doesn't sound too bad though, and I would honestly try to use it for that instead. Number 136, Spinning Slash. This is one of the select and scarce few weapon ashes I believe has achieved a nigh perfect equilibrium in damage, status, knockback, and overall value. A carefully curated set of advantages and disadvantages that meet perfectly at the intersection of just good enough and I can't be fucked going back to the round table and just want to play the shitting game. Spinning Slash gets the job done on any armament, its attack power is a dime a dozen, comes cheap, and sticks with you until the very end. You probably should replace it whenever you remember to, but we both know you won't, and there's not a goddamn thing wrong with that. Number 135, Sacred Blade. Finding the ash near the Church of Marika by Mistwood is far and away its most glaring advantage, and that's only because flat damage buffs on fast weapons this early in the game is practically one step away from just firing up Cheat Engine and making the game objectively easier by just changing the damage numbers yourself. You get your hands on this machination of war, and you will be unfuckwithable for the next 2 hours. And then you'll hit a snag in Altus, and there it will remain in your inventory for the rest of time, or until you see a Ghost Flame Dragon. Number 134, Savage Claws. Each attack in the sequence inflicts 60% of a normal R1's buildup, so 360% if all hits connect, but you don't have to worry about that because they're straight up just not going to. That's not really its purpose anyways. Ideally, you would spool it up from a slight distance and have an enemy walk into it and get flinched in all directions like they're being jostled around on a shitty wooden roller coaster. It doesn't do much poise damage, or that much regular damage to begin with, but it's only 13 FP, and it makes for an effective get the hell out of my face button if you're backed into a corner and don't have any other options. Number 133, Flame Dance. Grand total attack motion value of 450, and I don't know what that translates to in whip values, but I imagine it's significantly less than what it sounds. No, this will not do the damage of 2 consecutive giant hunts. It also only deals 20 poise damage in total because, well, it's a whip, and using a whip for anything that isn't status is more pointless than using your car's exhaust pipe as an air conditioner. Flame Dance tries really hard to challenge that though, and with the additional help of Dancer's Dress boosting its damage by 10%, it just about gets there. The very first hit can flinch even large enemies, you'll never be harassed by finger creepers on your way to the grocery store ever again, and it just needs 25 FP, lord of shit. Okay, that's a lot more expensive than I remember it being. Number 132, Regal Beast Claw. It's got a sweet spot right at the end of the hammer that lets you score big bonus PP damage, but that also increases the amount of stats you have to allocate for it to be optimal, since the weapon itself has a physical holy split, for some reason, and needs to be leveled with both strength and faith. It's very fine. I don't know, I'm largely indifferent on skills like these because there's no real utility outside of look at all this goddamn damage, and 20 FP still seems a tad too expensive for an ability subtype that uses low FP consumption as one of its major selling points. Number 131, Viper Bite. It's poison, but it's on a shield and it looks cooler than other poison abilities, so I'm indifferent on this one too. It's got a lot going for it in the style points department, but it achieves roughly the same effect as throwing around shit Molotovs. Number 130, Rain of Arrows. We're halfway through the bees and I'm still seeing bow skills, which means this one must be really special. Rain of Arrows is one of only 2 bow skills that challenge the idea of bow builds being secondary damage. The other skill being Radahn's Rain, which is Rain of Arrows on a testosterone booster. Even with DLC dragons getting the airtime and mobility they usually do, a mere shred of forethought is all you really need for this to properly land. It's not my first choice for dealing with Ghost Flame Dragons, but that's mostly due to the supermarket of options you have available for dispatching pests of the undead variety. Catch a dragon taking a nap and just rev this up in front of its face and you're looking about 1500 damage as a base, not including buffs and talismans. Number 129, Destined Death. I'd be chasing after that HP debuff utility like it owed me money if it wasn't already on the Black Knife, but sadly the debuff is really the best bargaining chip this unique skill brings to the table. The HP sapping effect is cut in half versus anything in the DLC, and even to a meager 35% of its usual efficiency against some of the DLC's trump card bosses like Bale and Radahn, in addition to needing 40 FP that could have been invested into a damage reduction buff or something. The knockback on the final hit of the skill I'm sure is important in some encounters, but if I'm itching so badly for a knockback that I'm willing to spend 40 FP just to get it, I have something else in my loadout that charges up twice as fast. Number 128, Flare O Serpent. I feel like this legitimately could have been a triple S showstopper of a skill if just a bit more thought went into it. 8 FP is the cheapiest of the cheaps for a weapon buff that doubles as a landmine, and if you're only ever using it as a weapon buff, then I think you could have landed on something much worse. But this skill has a couple interactions with other things in the game that I'm not the biggest fan of. The biggest problem being, oil pots can accidentally proc too early if you're trying to slam down the flail and get the explosion, because the fire damage on the flail hit will trigger the oil effect and wipe it before the explosion has a chance to take advantage of it. Number 127, Yokai's Dancing Blade. The Regalia and the Marae Greatsword both have the exact same motion values on this skill, despite one being a greatsword, which means unless you're specifically building for the Regalia straight sword, this variant of the skill is just always gonna lose out no matter what. Giving up the Marae skill and going for this one means throwing away around 1/6 of the potential damage, which sounds negligible on paper, but if you're somewhere in the endgame, or if you're knee-deep in the DLC with a maxed out Shadow Tree level, that's around 500 to 600 extra damage you're just not gonna have access to, all because you chose the wrong weapon without realizing it. Number 126, Unblockable Blade. I would still rather have the horizontal sweep of the Coded Sword instead of this, but the weapon skill gives you a nice comfortable option for poise breaking that doesn't cost a lot of FP. A direct hit with this Golden Bee Stinger gets you 30 points of poise damage, which makes about as much sense as causing a car accident with a plastic spoon, but 30 damage is 30 damage, and I think sometimes you can be allowed to just say how grateful you are for it and then shut the fuck up. Number 125, Blink Bolt Twin Axe. If the follow-up R2 didn't spiral my character halfway to Mount Fuckistan and forced most of the attacks to completely miss, maybe this could have been bumped up a letter grade or two, but half the attacks sail completely over smaller targets, and everything that's good about the skill, i.e. its poise damage, activating multi-hit talisman and such, are hinged on the condition of all the attacks actually landing properly. Something that wouldn't be such a massive issue if the second half of the attacks into spin didn't have noticeably higher attack MVs than the first half. It's marvelous when it works and when you've selected the right target that's large enough to eat all 6 hits, but trying to sell it as an all-purpose death machine that shits out W's is a very unfortunately common exaggeration that I've noticed from a lot of people. Number 124, Familial Rancor. Unintentional back burner, this one. I've taken out many annoyances on this poor weapon skill, and it straight up just did not deserve it. Doesn't mean it's earned any praise outside of good job showing up to work today either, but I'm willing to admit that I've misrepresented this one a fair bit in the past. Familial Rancor fires 6 bullets that total out to around 860% of the magic damage of a normal R1, but the magic damage only has a base of 58 on the actual flail, resulting in this skill only being around a third as good as it looks on paper. It also flinches enemies with the same stopping power as spilling a mildly warm cup of coffee on them, but if there's a single positive I can mark up this skill for, it's that the total damage is absolutely there, if all 6 bullets connect, and they might not. Pretty high chance they won't, actually. But connecting with a full barrage isn't some 3200 IQ task or anything. Like, you'll figure it out. Number 123, Shared Order. Shared Order shares a particular advantage with Sacred Order, Sacred Blade, and Last Rites, which is that their placement on this list can vastly fluctuate depending on how and if you're using them in the same build. Both Shared and Sacred Order can stack with Last Rites and Sacred Blade, and using multiple of the aforementioned is a large reason why players tend to swear by them so much. But using them individually and not taking proper advantage of their stackability does take away a lot of what makes them so spectacular in the first place. And unfortunately, arranging a list on a 1-by-1 basis does sort of fuck over all the skills in this category. So that's Shared Order is in the B for bitch, as in quit bitching about Ghost Flame Dragons and just stop fighting them. They're optional. Every single one of them are optional. Just stop it. Number 122 and 121, Determination and Royal Knight's Resolve. God damn. 1.03 really was just a different game altogether, wasn't it? Everyone thought Giant Crusher was cream of the crop, Moonveil reigned supreme, it still kinda does. Nothing with arcane scaling even worked properly, and RKR had a damage boost that could boost every bit of damage in your build, no matter where it came from, as long as the buff stayed active. This was bullshit. This was pre-Rivers of Blood. Elden Ring's primordial soup stage of life when half the game just didn't even bother showing up. And as soon as RKR got fixed, players of all builds immediately just stopped giving a shit. It popped up in one-shot YouTuber builds every now and then, and it certainly still pulls weight in that niche, but pretending it's as ubiquitous as it used to be is just a bold-faced lie that's so deep in the minds of denial it could start a career as a jeweler. Number 120, Golden Crux. It may not be my favorite skill, probably not even my favorite greatsword skill, or unique skill for that matter, but the fact that someone actually went back and thought of a second utility for this skill that allows it to double as a PvE ability has earned my respect for the rest of time. It's also incredibly pretentious of me to assume it was designed for for PvP first, and going by their track record, I now realize just how unlikely it was for that to be the case. But the point remains, it satisfies both sides of the community when it could have gotten away with just one. Now maybe lower that FP cost a tiny bit, or fatten up that hitbox on the first strike, because paying 31 FP for something that's bound to only hit once is some goddamn bullshit. Number 119, Dry Leaf Whirlwind. Man, I just feel sorry for this one. Every advantage this weapon Ash gives you is flat out nullified by the unfortunate fact of life that it has no choice but to compete with Palm Blast, an infinitely, indisputably mightier workhorse. Imagine being in your elementary school talent show with a set of magic tricks that actually work and took genuine time to develop and practice, and then here comes Billie fucking Eilish with a boombox and depression ready to slay the school with her slam poetry about why math sucks. Or something. Does this metaphor work? Is this funny? Who fucking gives a shit? It makes the point. That's what's important. Who cares? Number 118, Prelate's Charge. This really doesn't do that much damage. I guess I'm just so used to attaching this to colossal weapons that make the motion values do a bit more work, but apparently I had to dig pretty deep to think of that one healing interaction with Great Stars forever ago, because I'm using it again right now, and that's like the best thing I can see coming from it. If you want to bring home some big numbers, you better be slapping this on a colossal weapon like Duelist Great Axe, and that's really not a good weapon for just about anything. Granted, it is cheap, and the forward momentum and continuous pressure means you can activate most multi-hit talisman effects in barely a second. It's flexible, but every so often, it's gonna need a bit of help. Number 117, Chilling Mist. I remember it being extremely hard not to go crazy over this skill because it had such a profoundly high build-up ceiling, but anything willing to stay still for 4 seconds and face fuck the whole cloud is something that can probably be killed with a plastic kitchen knife if you were patient enough. I'd much rather go for a freezing pot or the 2 full moon spells if I want a shitload of frostbite status up front without much fuss, but on paper it is one of the highest build-up options you can find for frostbite. Unfortunately, Elden Ring wasn't made with a textbook. 116, Glintstone Dart. Another unique skill I may have crudely undervalued in the past, but I constantly feel like I'm one compliment away from finding out the dagger has an ego and really wants it to be stroked. It's a skill that's just plain full of itself. The initial dart has only 190 base magic damage when charged, which is strong but not quite enough to allow it to compete with Night Comet, yet that appears to be a widely accepted comparison for some reason. Assuming you're charging both, that's a gap in power close to 80-90 base damage, and it doesn't pierce targets. But the major selling point here is the stance break potential with the follow-up. With a poise MV of 1000, that little magic floss pit can punch through solid ice. Anything that gives you 30 poise damage on a dagger is remarkable enough to be celebrated, or at least, you know, mentioned in some mildly enthusiastic way. And it still loses out to Glint Blade Phalanx anyways, so I'm leaning more towards the latter. Number 115, Thundercloud Form. There were a lot of noticeable upticks in general skill performance given to certain subcategories by the DLC, thanks to boosts given by the Enraged Divine Beast and Dread Talismans, the Aged One's Exaltation, armor effects like those seen on On's box attire, and even consumables like Sacred Bloody Flesh have an extra kick in the ass to bleed builds. Thundercloud Form hasn't exactly been left behind, but it is a skill that gets very quickly forgotten about, and the 1.07 buff to its directional control is only counterbalanced by its DLC prep nerf that sliced off a decent chunk of its kneecap ability. The elevated hitbox is apparently a farce. I guess they lowered the opacity specifically so that you couldn't see your character's balls dragging the ground, absorbing every bit of possible damage you would have soaked up normally. Number 114, Dynastic Sickle Play. It no longer farts through stamina reserves like an esports player at a high school track meet, but when looking at the math here, it seems Dynast's Finesse is still just an all-around better pal to have on your side. The total damage can measure up pretty well if all hits connect, but it's less likely to flinch enemies out of attacks and keep them passive to receive the full attack chain, which leaves players very prone to overcommittance and possibly taking more damage than they're prepared to, just because they wanted that sweet, sweet bleed proc. And it's not like I feel bad for you or anything if that's what you were trying to accomplish, but advice is advice nonetheless. Fucking do what you want with it, I guess. Number 113, Shriek of Milos. The 30 FP cost was a little troublesome for me to get behind, but the weapon it's attached to mitigates some of that by giving you an FP on kill effect. Even still, I find this skill to be surprisingly restrictive the more I fooled around with it. There's a glitch that affects defense shred values to reflect that of PvP instead of PvE, which is almost always going to be a negative result. This would have been the skill's largest point of attraction. Unfortunately, until that glitch gets fixed, all this ends up being is a glorified, highly decorated war cry effect on a ketogenic diet and some hormone pills. Number 112, Thunderstorm. Cool. Thanks for the nerf. fuck me in the tub. I had some nice things to say about this one too. Is getting boosted by a talisman technically even a positive if you nerf half the storm shit just to prepare for its arrival? You nerfed every storm ability except Stormblade, the one Ashe that probably needed it the most, and even still those nerfs had to do with poise generation speed and not the skill's actual damage. No, Thunderstorm was the only skill in the whole lineup that received a direct damage nerf to such an extent that Divine Beast Talisman is now completely necessary for it to be even worth it. And that lightning buff would have been wonderful if you could untether it from that ingrown bird-shaped tumor you call an axe. Number 111, Beast's Roar. It's simple, it's straightforward, and the damage is a cup of frothing ass baking in the mid-July sun. But the brass tacks here is that if the range and stopping power are good enough, and the trajectory is predictable enough, there will always be a niche that welcomes it with open arms. It's usable on every weapon in the game that can accept it. Using it at point blank hands out 18 poise damage for only 10 FP, which is pretty impressive. The bullet is fast, it flinches nearly anything it hits, and Stormblade still eclipses every single advantage it brings to the table by just being Stormblade. Number 110, Storm Assault. It's good enough. Gets boosted by Divine Beast Talisman, so now it's 10% better. Number 109, Golden Retaliation. This skill only specifically works on projectiles with a certain elemental aura to them. It can deflect fireballs, magic polygons, and frisbees, but Commander Gaius's rock shotgun? Nope, doesn't work on any of Radahn's gravity projectiles, pest threads from the Kindred, perfumer spam, and anything considered a bullet of physical origin, which is like 75% of anything being thrown at you at any given moment. Honestly, I think the biggest reason why players continue to be so obsessed with this one is because it's able to deflect your own spells like Discus of Light with the right timing. And granted, as impressive of a discovery as that is, it's not like you landed on the fucking moon or anything. Like, that's still an incredibly niche advantage that doesn't really dissuade me from going with Carian Retaliation most of the time. Number 108 and 107, Light and Darkness. Alright class, grab your best pair of scissors cause it's time to start splitting hairs. I received a mixed bag of assorted arguments of different favors being both for and against how I separated these two skills previously. I didn't agree with all of them, but enough of a case was properly made for me to at least consider that the effects given by these two skills are at least not as cut and dry of a decision as I once thought. Light is a body buff, meaning it gets cancelled out by other body buffs like Howl of Shabriri, FGMS, Dragon Bolt, Blood Boil, you know, that whole list. However, none of these really offer specific advantages when it comes to building around holy damage, which is what the light buff is obviously meant to do. Light is also arguably more FP efficient since you're getting 60 seconds of uptime no matter what, whereas with the darkness debuff, the effect will only last for as long as it takes for you to kill whatever is afflicted with it. This is very important if you plan on using the skill in standard encounters because you'll just be reapplying the debuff more often and farting through that much more FP. It's a delicate balance, and deciding which one is better for you ultimately depends on what else in your build Light can stack with. You lose out on FGMS, sure, but you still retain stackability with Golden Vow, Shared Order, and even unique holy weapon buffs like Last Rites, Death Flare, and Euphoria. Number 106, Cursed Blood Slice. As in, sliced off its nuts and amputated almost all of its true combo potential since 1.09. I used to like this one. I still do. I still like it. I still think it's cool. I think it's one of the most visually stylish weapon skills tied to Blood Flame builds, right next to Bloodblade Dance, and no matter what I say about it, it still drunkenly stumbled its way into the A tier like my conservative great uncle after someone insults his Jeep, so the potential for it to stand proudly still very much exists. It just needs to, well, I guess try a little harder now. Ansbach's attire helps it out to a marginal extent, but the true combo ability of the unique skill is just completely gone, and it's not coming back. Still covers a wide area, still bleeds, still fires. It's good. It's still pretty good. Number 105, Spinning Chain. Y'all ought to be ashamed of yourselves. I thought I trusted some of you. That old-ass Ashes of War video has over 2 million views on it, and I didn't see a single person discussing my unintentional leaving out of Spinning Chain. It's not technically an Ashe, sure, since you can't get it anywhere, but how has that one minor fact about the skill somehow stopped it from appearing in a single video up until now? I just flat out forgot about it, and nobody's given a shit for over a year. It has to be one of the most FP-efficient status skills you ever pick up, even further so with bleed affinities. Using it without FP still gives you around half the status buildup, and the frequency of repeated attacks makes it one of the only, possibly the only weapon skill you can exploit in this way. And not a single one of you thought that was even worth a mention. Have I ever actually said the word spinning and chain this close together in any other video? Number 104, Divine Beast Frost Stomp. Not only is it chargeable, giving it free access to Godfrey Icon's 15% attack boost, it explores synergy with the Shattered Stone and Shard of Alexander talismans, all of which can throttle the damage on this skill to a height never before it's never before seen except on most top shelf skills that excel far past this skill in damage. Nice script writing, by the way. Face. It's seen quite frequently, actually. When you look at it in the grand scheme, the damage is by no means impressive, but it's still 225 base magic damage that's very easily boostable by some of the game's greatest talismans, in addition to its already crazy frostbite buildup, totaling out to a grand value of pretty fucking good, I guess. Next section. Number 103, Tongues of Fire. Tongues of Fire has a pretty debilitating drawback that I think kills most of the potential the skill could have had, which is the need to be in a blocking position when using it. The FP cost is negligible, at least compared to the amount of stamina you'll be investing into this just to keep it up for more than 2 seconds. The flame jets nailed their targets for 10 poise damage per tick, making these flames some of the heaviest in existence. These flames could jujitsu a fucking bear into a pretzel knot, but if anything gets even moderately aggressive during the cast and decides to burst through the damage cone, it's not gonna matter how much stamina your build has, you're gonna have to put the shield down and actually fight shit for a while. Number 102, Sea of Magma, known as its former alias, the Helicopter of Kneecappers. Aptly named, you whip this out for so much as a couple seconds, somebody's shins they're obliterated. They're in fucking space somewhere. And this doesn't come with any hyper armor whatsoever, so it's probably gonna be your ass. This V10 engine spurts out 8 poise damage per revolution. It's compatible with all the best talismans, and it's probably the only stance break option you'll ever have available on a whip. It's also cinematic as shit and doesn't spit through FP as quickly as you think it does. Still empties the tank pretty quickly, but it's not like Dragon Communion levels of expense or anything. Number 101, Deadly Dance. Nope, definitely not a status skill. Far from it. Each hit from those Cirque blades in the first half of the skill collectively inflict just as much status as a standard R1. So if you're trying to bleed something with it, fucking quit it. Don't waste your FP or your stamina. Or your health, because someone will knock your shit off before you finish it. Everything hinges on whether or not you can pull off the full 1-2 of the skill. That follow-up axe kick has an attack MV of 148, which doesn't sound too impressive, but it can easily climb over the 1000 mark by itself on a proper build, and it's boosted by the Shattered Stone Talisman, which isn't something I was expecting them to even remember, since half the stomping abilities that don't have the word stomp in their name get completely ignored by it. Number 100, Radahn's Rain. Analogous to Rain of Arrows in just about every way possible except for one key difference. It powers up with the use of Radahn's Spears, grabbing its total damage by the nostrils and flinging it so far past the damage ceiling of Rain of Arrows that calling it a competition is a borderline cancelable offense. There's a little else needed to present this skill. It needs no introduction, nor any color commentary or verbal embellishment. If it's big and it sucks at moving, it won't be alive for long. That's Radahn's Rain. Number 99, Repeating Thrust. Another reliable staple in the library of boring but effective weapon ashes that come as a default on at least a couple weapons. Nothing special would be a brazen overstatement of its visual qualities and flair. It's about as boring as a second coat of white paint. It's the tax accountant of weapon ashes. But the extremely low FP costs and the straightforward animation, combined with its easy access to pierce damage, means it's here to stay for quite possibly the rest of time. Number 98, Earthshaker. The poise damage of the shockwave is totaled up by 2 values, a flat 30 and then 100% poise damage of whatever weapon you're using it with. So if you're executing it with a Great Hammer, that's a total of 37. Take an additional 140 poise MV for the follow-up swing for a grand total of 47 poise damage. That is a poise damage to FP ratio of just over 3, which is absolutely fucking nutter butter. That shit's so insane it needs a straitjacket. The upfront damage is equally impressive, as it can climb to around 4.5 times that of a normal R1 if you land both hits point blank, and that's it. I thought the math was going to be a bit more intensive for that one, because there's a lot of attack IDs in the params, but it's just adding fucking numbers together, I guess. It's not really that complicated. Number 97, Transient Moonlight. Okay, so this one actually has a bit of math. Each swing, horizontal or vertical, slaps fuckers with a poise MV of 450, translating to 22.5 poise damage on a katana. Additionally, the magic wave that fires forward slaps on an extra 5 for the horizontal slash, and 7.5 for the vertical slash. The magic waves do exclusively magic damage, fucking obviously, with a base of either 140 for the horizontal or 155 for the vertical, with attack MVs of 50 and 55 respectively. actually. In layman's terms, it excels decently ahead of the average, but it's really never been as good as everyone thinks. 30 poise damage in exchange for 20 FP is a diving board straight into the pool of slightly above average, but the extremely quick animation means it can be spammed ad nauseum with pretty much zero drawbacks. Number 96. Anza's Line of Stars. The combined total attack MV for all 6 attacks is, it's a shitload. I'm sure it's a lot. It certainly looks like it. Look, math is starting to get a little tiring, so I'm just going to leave this one with the label of slightly better Moonveil and just keep on trucking, because I've been recording for an extremely long time and my ass is starting to itch. Number 95, Ruinous Ghost Flame. This one used to have trouble measuring up to the rest of the boys in the status but also flat damage weapon buff club, a surprisingly highly populated union of skills and abilities, but Ruinous Ghost Flame eventually came around with a few buffs that increased its magic attack power and frostbite buildup. And now it's better than it was before. It still tends to lose out versus Ice Lightning Sword just because math exists, and we can tell from the higher numbers on it that it's just better for most situations. Number 94, Vacuum Slice. Good enough would be doing it a disservice, but it's also in a weird spot where giving it any more compliments than it deserves might steer people in the wrong direction. It's not exactly all-purpose, not really niche enough to immediately dismiss. You would ideally want to line up a target so that it gets hit with both the weapon and the bullet, but if that's not possible for some reason, the bullet seems to do enough work on its own just fine. You still get 20 poise damage out of it, and 200 base physical that's scalable with strength and dex. Doesn't get boosted by the Divine Beast Talisman despite it sharing evidenced relation to a lot of the storm spells and abilities in the game, but once again, not having the word storm literally in the fucking title of the skill bars it from receiving the tangible bonus, I guess. Even despite the word vacuum being provably synonymous with other words like alright, well, I guess. I thought I had something there, but I guess I didn't. Fuck. Information strikes again, I guess. Number 93, Solitary Moon Slash. I guess Savage Vacuum Slice didn't sound cool enough, except for the fact that it totally would've, but I'm not the creative director, so who fucking cares? Maybe they named it this because they wanted to emphasize its uniqueness, but this weapon skill feels neither solitary nor moon-related. The title is 33% accurate to the subject matter of the actual skill, and in the US, I can't legally give you less than a 45% for morale reasons. But I'm willing to look over most of these obvious non-issues because the stance break potential on that follow-up slash could cripple Titans. This shit could knock down Megatron if he was in the game. I'm a little conflicted on what exactly this means for the skill, because a lot of the performance arguably comes from the weapon itself just being torqued out of its mind. But damage is damage, and this video is probably almost 2 hours long at this point, so I'm not in the mood to overthink things. Number 92, Night in Flame Stance. Fuck, man. Is this how it feels to watch your son hit a home run at baseball practice? I'm so proud of this skill and all the distance it's covered over the years. Remember when no one knew how to shut the hell up about how broken this was, and then it got Sparta kicked off the power ladder and bashed his forehead on every step down until it was just a highly decorative nothing? Watching this skill slowly crawl back up to a usable position was blessing enough, but then oil pots got better, Rolana's cameo boosted all the stance ashes, and tweaks were made little by little to where faint whispers traveled through the walls of the player base until they became great reverberations of the truth, chanting that this skill was once again a linchpin of indisputable domination, and I'm just really fucking happy about it. Number 91, Weed Cutter. I'm convinced this company would suffer an internal meltdown before recognizing scythes can be used as actual weapons. What they are in real life doesn't matter. A fucking bouquet isn't a weapon either, but it's in the game, so why isn't this a scythe ash? No, I want an answer. Why isn't it a scythe ash? Unexpectedly, the Weed Cutter skill does end up being pretty useful on this weapon because Rakshasa's Great Katana comes with a hidden bonus that increases your resistance to being flinched out of things in exchange for taking just a little more damage. And by a little, I mean 10%. Which is, that's not a little. Quite a sizable inconvenience, actually. But the skill itself is good, maintains pressure, builds status decently well, hyper armor is insane, but a lot of the poise improvements come from the effects of the actual weapon itself. Number 90, the Dragon Halberd's Spinning Slash. Right down to the effect ID it uses, it is provably, scientifically the exact same weapon buff found on Ice Lightning Sword. And the only reason I don't necessarily agree with that is because this halberd has an extremely slow R1 attack chain that doesn't profit nearly as much from those numbers. 160 flat lightning damage and 80 frost buildup per poke is still some fat gravy you're slopping down. And the alternate halberd animation chain does help out the anti-dragon effect quite a bit, since they're all thrusting attacks, but if I'm chasing lightning damage or frost buildup, there's really no reason not to just go on ahead and dig out the dragon scale blade, since that weapon's just going to be faster anyways. Number 89, Bloodhound's Finesse. Bloodhound's Finesse used to be a Havarti cheese sandwich dipped in melted pepper jack and then blasted with a Cheese Whiz power washer. But after coming to terms with the existence of the perpetually oversaturated pool of Blood Oath abilities, madness builds, and the game's encyclopedic book of methods used to reset Frostbite, I tend to greet Bloodhound's Finesse like an old friend these days. The damage is dependable, the invincibility windows contribute to a fight without feeling like bullshit, and 44 poise damage on a CGS for 20 FP is a trade I would gladly take even in my worst moments. From there, the extra bleed is just an accessory. Numbers 88 and 87, Scattershot Throw. This skill shows a slight promise of being future-proof because usually status build-up this powerful gets a noticeable nerf straight away. But the only thing they've nerfed on record is its headshot multiplier no longer being something you have to worry about in PvP. And we know how little of a shit they tend to give about anything involving friends, so hopefully that can be used as evidence that the status power of this weapon skill is here to stay. At least it better be, because it's just about the only reason I can think of to pick up a throwing blade. Number 86, Great Serpent Hunt. It's riskier than Crypto, it's slower than your digestive system when processing pizza grease, but that Skyscraper Poise MV has me throwing this shit at anything with legs with terrifyingly reckless abandon. 83 total poise damage could be tied to a real-life shot caller, and I would still probably use it half the time I normally would have. One successful point-blank hit versus anything, and you fully understand why that windup is as long as it is. In fact, looking at the motion values and how the weapon itself works, the Storm Blade in the Rykard fight is really just an elongated hitbox that allows it to deal damage without taking hits from the lava. When looking at the attacks side by side, the MVs, at least for the most part, are very similar. It has nothing to do with Rykard being afraid of thunderstorms or something. The weapon just has so much bite that it can take down what's debatably the most powerful shard bearer we ever end up facing in the base game. Number 85, Piercing Fang. FP cost might be a bit high for all its advantages, but whether or not it hits for adequate damage is mostly determined by the weapon you place it on. It's a fairly straightforward thrusting attack that benefits from all the thrust-favoring buffs and talismans, but its damage is tied wholly to an attack MV of 212, no matter the weapon it's paired with. The 100% guard bypass makes it reliable enough to stick around in just about any situation, since it just ends up being a powerful, plain-dealing burst of physical damage that also doesn't give a fuck about shields. Tie this bitch to a great spear and watch it sing. Number 84, Magma Shower. This is a modified, reskinned spinning slash variant that already packed a sizable amount of heat in its full combo, and now with the Dread Talisman further heightening its potential, it's not just a stable and constant chunk of damage, it's a stable and constant shitload of damage. It's fire, it's DOT, it's still a little lacking in the poise department, but being a curved sword kind of predisposes you to that, unfortunately. Add in a pinch of hyper armor on the windup and it's probably the only skill you'll ever need. Number 83, the Queen's Black Flame. Everything that has to do with Black Flame now is just a big ol' who the fuck knows, because I was expecting this to reach new levels of ash cheekage I didn't think was possible for this skill due to the admittedly creative way they nerfed Black Flame in the DLC. Nope, much to my surprise, that glow-eyed bitch still throws it back like a ballistic missile. This comes from most of its upfront damage being dealt from its attack MV and not the lingering Black Flame that comes afterwards. So if you heard one of my 27 rants about how the DLC treats Black Flame like a Los Santos prostitute, just be aware that this skill is apparently a very large exception. Number 82, Black Flame Tornado. Okay, fucking never mind. I give up. Can someone else research this shit for once? Black Flame Tornado still performs beautifully on most level 1 runs due to its Black Flame debuff scaling off of max HP, but this skill has opened up multiple pathways of confusion that I'm having a hard time digesting all at once. Not only does most of the skill's potential damage come from the debuff, meaning its performance suffers significantly against DLC encounters, and specifically DLC bosses strong against fire, but the function of the Divine Beast Talisman is officially objectively inaccurate because there are now 2 separate skills that each use the word tornado in their title, and this talisman only boosts 1. Oh, and the Godfrey icon still doesn't work. Shit's been out for like a year at this point. I still think it's better than Queen's Black Flame because it's just so, once you start use it, once you get how to use it, it's multi-purpose. Like it just eats everything without you even needing to play the fucking game. I just wish that were truer in the DLC, is all. Number 81, Blade of Death. The sapping effect unfortunately gets lumped in with other black flame effects in the DLC, but when almost all of the DLC bosses come equipped with an enlarged HP bar and their own anti-tank armor, slinging out that blade o' death and just zapping away a fixed percentage of their life force becomes only that much stronger. You hate seeing Radahn's notched up health scaling modifier that makes his whole fight last way too long? Here's an all-purpose multi-surface cleaner that just sham-wows 10% of that shit right off. If you're not facing a boss or a large enemy with an absurd HP scaling modifier, its job is to be put away and out of sight until it is needed. Number 80, Bloody Slash. Shit, this was way better than I remember it being. Wow. I haven't used Bloody Slash in a decently long while, to such an extent that I sometimes just forget it's an ability you can even use because of how basic and boring it is. But the physical base damage of 345 had me doing a big ol' what the fuck face into this imaginary webcam of mine like a Twitch streamer. I was so floored. I would have staked the entire channel on this weapon ash just not ever being that powerful. On smaller weapons like daggers and curved swords, this can potentially reach a ceiling of around 4 times a normal R1 with good arcane, in addition to receiving a boost from Ansbach's attire. It's one of the few blood abilities that I've seen emphasize damage over status, while still being able to do both. But the HP penalties don't take long at all to add up, and repeated, unchecked uses of it in boss fights can and will get you killed in a pretty hilarious way. Number 79, Eruption. Toss Shard of Alexander and Dread Talisman on this bitch and it becomes a nuclear pile driver of unmitigated disaster. This used to be the middest of the mids, but it's able to take advantage of so many stackable talismans and effects, and it's been the recipient of a bunch of different buffs like hyper armor and animation speed, and slowly over time it's become a sturdy, reliable powerhouse that actually makes magma builds look decent. As far as whether or not it measures up versus Magma Shower and other magma related skills, it's kinda gonna depend on who you're actually using it against. But the MVs on this are so absurdly high that calling it unworthy of being in the competition would just be a triple-decker denial sandwich. Number 78, Sorcery of the Crozier. Way too many people underestimate this one, but if you can get the same target to eat the entire ring of projectiles, it returns some of the highest magic damage in the entire game. On a plus 25, that's 480 base magic damage and 180 starting tracking on the side as a free bonus, which is, it's a lot. It's a fuckload, actually. Like, I know I don't bring up target tracking that much on the channel as like a potential selling point, but 180 is like crazy high for a projectile like this. At medium range against a slow enough target, it's extremely common and very easy for all 8 bullets to connect with the same dude, and that's going to end up handing out Night Comet levels of damage for just 15 FP and no intelligence investment since the damage is directly related to weapon level. The speed, however, is incredibly lacking, and it can be dodged by something if they're coked up enough. Number 77, Carrion Retaliation. Any projectile that doesn't have physical attributes, be it flaming, glowing, or sparky, might as well just not exist anymore. This is your skeleton key to any spammable, straightforward projectile of any element, and it doesn't even cost FP if you whiff. Draconic Sentinel Fireballs, Malekith's Black Blade Moon Slices, Mog's Blood Shotguns, Foreskin Duo's Monochrome Filter Fire fuck shit, and it seems most other parry options have been stealth nerfed at some point in time, leaving Carrion Retaliation poised to receive the gold medal in pretty much every contestable category. Number 76, Flame Skewer. Honestly, I'm really just impressed by the amount of shit you can attach this to. You can slap it on weapons as small and generic as a thrusting sword, or a Zweihander of mammoth proportions you technically have never had enough strength to wield because you're so used to actually two-handing it. Putting it on a generic rapier actually makes the animation look incredibly dumb, but it is a nice way to get some vertical range on smaller weapons if you're fighting dragons or enemies with really high head hitboxes. I tend to like it best on colossal swords though, since the total poise damage of the full combo ends up at 39, which given the relatively fast animation speed is quite a tough benchmark to compete with. Number 75, Glintstone Pebble. The pebble part of the weapon ash kinda just scales with everything. Intelligence, weapon level, weapon scaling. So on an in-game build that's tailored for it, that little pebble becomes a 357 Magnum in capable hands. The follow-up attack reaches 400 for the poise MV, but what ultimately holds it back is that it can only be placed on swords and polearms capable of thrusting, which generally aren't really the greatest for poise breaking purposes. Even with a great spear, the follow-up attack by itself can only reach 22 poise damage. That by itself is certainly not rookie numbers or anything, but since its only major competition is Glint Blade Phalanx, it's gonna find itself coming up short no matter what. Number 74, spinning gravity thrust. Just a goddamn knuckle sandwich is what this thing is. I don't think I've been flinched out of this attack so much as one time, and I've used this Ash to play chicken with a charging falling star beast. The full performance of that animation is as indisputable as the heat death of the universe. There is no stopping that shit. This is just what the Murray Greatsword skill would look like if you forgot to let go of the fucking weapon. You don't just use it as a drill, you become the drill. Someone calls you for some carpentry work, don't worry about bringing a toolkit, you are the toolkit, motherfucker. Number 73, Sacred Order. This one ended up being a bit tougher to call than I was expecting, just because its undead mulching utility has garnered a wave of fanatics after we all learned what horrible ideas the Ghost Flame Dragons were. Doing 100% more damage on undead enemies is going to be favorable during only around like 10% of the game, where what you're fighting is actually an undead enemy, but there's another layer to this nuanced burrito that actually places Sacred Order as one of the greatest buffs in the entire game, and that is its flexibility. Being a weapon buff gives it synergy with Golden Vow, FGMS, Rallying Standard, any aura buff or body buff you can think of that deserves to be given its own monument somewhere in the Met. Just go ahead and slap it on top of this. It won't override anything, and both the 10% bonus and the double damage bonus against undead carry over to spells, other weapons, and even consumable items. Number 72, the Poison Flower blooms twice. Works on both poison and scarlet rot of all varieties and strains, meaning poison mothflight can officially get two things. 1, fucked, and 2, off my goddamn property. It's a detonation skill, so it's going to work better with poisons of longer duration like the standard poison seen on Poison Pots and Poisonous Mist, or the rot variant from Hefty Rot Pots or Scarlet Aeonia. Inflict both for 5-digit damage numbers, and you don't even need Shadow Tree help from the DLC since both status ailments scale from your max HP. Number 71, Quick Step. Step quickly, stride rapidly, skirt suddenly, elude expeditiously, avoid alertly, escape abruptly. Number 70, the Wing of Estelle's Nebula. The nebula on this weapon has a distinct advantage over its bastard brother, which is the noticeably decreased hit duration in between bullets. This is why enemies who get hit with the Flail's Nebula only seem to eat 1 or 2 hits at maximum, while the nebula on the Curved Sword can easily line up a good 4 or 5. It manages to worm its way into the game's top candidates for poise break potential just because the average enemy can take so many hits from it at once. A real haymaker of magic damage you're handing out here, but the FP cost, just like its bastard bitch twin brother, does sort of prevent it from being a permanent mainstay. Number 69, Lion's Claw. 20 FP on the right builds goes a long way, and on strength builds with a good talisman setup, the amount of dopamine your brain releases upon pile driving someone's spine through their gooch with a pneumatic hammer cannot be replicated by many. Even without FP, it can still climb decently above a normal R1 with an attack MV of 138 and a poise MV of 250, which is still far from useless on colossal swords and weapons if you don't mind the loss of hyper armor. And you absolutely should mind it because that hyper armor is the key to this weapon skill's true power. Fuck trading with colossal weapons. You'll be trading with Colossus from God of War with this instrument of demolition. Number 68, Giant Hunt. When it comes to the raw damage numbers, Giant Hunt doesn't exactly math its way past the heavier-handed Lion's Claw or other unique skills like Smithing Art Spears and Waves of Darkness, but the additional verticality on the upward poke opens up a special niche in dragon combat, while still retaining great stopping power against just about anything else. It makes for a much more flexible weapon ash on spears and halberds, and just feels infinitely more fun while still getting the work done. A+, good job. Number 67, Impaling Thrust. I prefer this one over the Piercing Fang for multiple reasons. The largest ones being noticeably friendlier FP economy, and having a quicker animation than most charged heavy attacks. Putting this on a great spear or a great sword can net you 33 poise damage from the thrust, and that can then be chained very comfortably into an R1 string that reduces most standard-sized enemies to wildlife tier in terms of how threatening they are. The guard bypass on Piercing Fang does help out against soldiers, knights, and I guess the ancestral fuckers that sometimes get guard frames when they charge up their turbo bitch backhand attack or whatever, but that's really about it. Enemies, for the most part, are keenly interested in embarrassing you as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and that just doesn't leave a lot of room for shielding. Number 66, Blind Spot. It's fun to use, and it's a returning classic. These 2 bullet points convince me this Ashe honestly could have been complete dog shit, and I think it still would have retained over half its current audience of simps. The small window of invulnerability is only around half the length of a normal dodge, but the activation is instant, which makes timing a pretty small issue. It takes Gollum Smiths behind the Cracker Barrel parking lot for a backwoods beatdown, but the attack MV is only 145, which isn't really like an outrageous amount considering it's on a backhand blade, but the high maneuverability and guard bypass makes it a very comfortable weapon Ashe on what's already an exceedingly comfortable weapon to be using on just about any build that doesn't involve strength. Number 65, Promised Consort. Might need to turn down your graphical settings for this one, especially if you're using it in water, but if you can get past that hilariously common hurdle, you now have access to one of the most grandiose, cinematic, overly pictorial, visually electrifying weapon skills capable of delivering 5-digit damage to just about anything that's mentally zonked enough to stand still and receive it. And it still gets beat by half the weapon Ashes that come equipped to things as a default. That's just brilliant. Fucking jokes write themselves at this point. Number 64, Ice Lightning Sword. FP cost is a little much, quite a bit much, actually. I would assume because we're spending it on both a straightforward attack and a subsequent buff that's pretty decent, but that doesn't really change how much I could do with 25 extra FP. The weapon itself has good strength and dex scaling, and the 22 poise damage from the skill is still a sizable amount for a katana, but a lot of the skill's value is going to be placed on the buff that comes afterwards, as well as how you're putting it to good use. 80 Frostbite buildup per swing is just mathematically better than Ruinous Ghost Flame since katanas have faster attack animations. 160 flat damage on a weapon buff is entering the city limits of Bullshitville with how amazing it is, and very few elemental weapon buffs are capable of contending with it, even to this day. Number 63, Rallying Standard. I think FromSoft may have been distracted by the cabal of cow towers throwing this into their one-shot builds in hopes of some quick YouTube moolah, and I only know that was something people were chasing because I was bitches at one point. And I think that just inadvertently led to FromSoft just looking at this one and going, it's probably fine. Even though it works with Old Lord's Talisman despite being a skill, vastly reduced the damage of most unique weapon skills like Waterfowl Dance, Nebula, Wolf's Assault, and many others, and both these issues have continued to affect the skill after nearly 10 patches now. I try to avoid using obvious glitches or bugs as arguments for where a specific item gets placed, but when something this detrimental just gets outright ignored for over a year, I think the debate between this and Golden Vow is no longer about which one needs more FP. If it ever gets fixed, then, I mean, obviously use this over Golden Vow, but, well, so far that day hasn't come. Number 62, Square Off. All right, this is where it is, okay? I'm putting it here. 600 poise MV gives lightweight sword and board builds that aren't really interested in leveling outside of strength or dex an incredibly large window into the art of kneecap disintegration. That'll be 30 poise damage you're handing out at any given moment with the Stand Star 2. And with the new addition of Rolana's cameo, the damage climbs to mountainous heights that has no problem racing past most other equipable weapon Ashes, despite this one coming straight out of the box on most standard swords. Listing it as low as I did previously and not receiving community-wide backlash that made me fear cancellation for a couple days is empirical evidence that life is sometimes just a little too fair. Fuck making a post on Reddit. I'm thankful no one showed up to my apartment. Number 61, Wave of Gold. I've got no complaints. It's a giant golden wave that deals giant golden damage. Hard to hate the FP cost in most cases. 42 seems pretty fair for something you can't even get until you've not just played through, but beaten the game in its entirety. So if I feel like waving a magic wand and just slicing megabytes off the game's file space, then I'll say I've goddamn earned it. Every so often, a small enough enemy will just kind of Danny Phantom its way through the hitbox, but that's a scarce enough occurrence for me to just not really care most of the time. I wish the player base would get a little more creative when making fun of abilities. Right now, the meta seems to be replacing something in its title with the word piss if it's yellow, Wave of Piss, Sacred Ring of Piss, Golden Pit, well, I guess that would encompass quite a few different Ashes at once. Prayerful Piss, I don't know, I keep seeing it, quit it. Number 60, Needle Piercer. So does using Law of Regression after taking a needle to the face bring back all the buffs you equipped? I mean, of course not, right? Like, there's no fucking way it would. That's just not how effect application works. This is where you jump cut to a clip of someone testing this in PvP and proving me wrong in like 7 seconds. Unfortunately, the utility of buff removal doesn't really get too much spotlight in PvE. You can remove the Braggart buff from Grave Duelists, and it can knock the exaltation effect off of Sanguine Nobles if they proc a status, but that's mostly it. I also saw a really funny comment on the Fextra Life wiki asking if this if this could cure Millicent. Number 59, Shriek of Sorrow. The way the buff interacts with the player's health is what sells this effect. Since it buffs your damage based on your remaining health at the time of buffing, you can whip this out at around half health and receive a 20% bonus to damage, and then heal yourself back up to full, and it still keeps the 20% boost. The only exception to this is that the very last tier that activates at 30% HP, which grants you a damage boost of 25%. Healing anywhere past this benchmark will just bring the boost back to 20%. But that's in addition to increasing the base strength scaling of your weapon by 5 points. Not exactly good enough to make up for the 5% damage difference, but this is a weapon buff, so you can stack some stupid shit on top of it to make it work if you want. Number 58, Gravity Bolt. You know what? I'm not ashamed of this opinion. In fact, I'm proud as fuck of these guys. They've had every single opportunity to take out the napalm and scorch the earth with this one and leave this skill as a skid mark on the pavement like a line of fecal matter in those shorts we both know you haven't washed. But much to people's surprise, as well as my own, they left the damage, scaling, stagger value, and stamina damage versus shielding enemies completely alone and unadjusted. Poise Break here didn't just take the brunt of the damage, it quite literally sacrificed itself to the fire and brimstone of Miyazaki's programming team so the rest of the skill's advantages could stay and flourish. This was a skill that admittedly could have used a nerf way before it ever actually received one, but it was only one. It changed what it needed to in a respectable way that didn't bleed over into every other facet of how the skill worked, and it hasn't been adjusted since. Good fucking job. Like, I sincerely mean that. Holy shit. Number 57, Smithing Art Spears. I'm sorry, Eruption just can't hang. Not even with the Dread Talisman. It gets close, but not even. Smithing Art Spears is just too powerful. It's got a slap that can rend mountains. Testing them side by side, Eruption only did more work when attached to a Fire Affinity Colossal weapon with the Dread Talisman also equipped. You're also getting around 80% more poise damage out of Smithing Art Spears on the first 2 impacts, 45 poise damage that's dealt pretty much instantly as the hammer is brought back up. Eruption is only capable of producing 42, and that's assuming your target is patient enough to kindly disable their animations like I did here, and take all the lingering damage straight to the face, because that's where half of Eruption's poise damage actually comes from. Eruption can win out slightly in a straight up damage race, but only if your build is finely tuned specifically towards magma skills like Eruption. Like, make no mistake, Eruption absolutely is better after the buffs, but you have to drag this motherfucker's carcass over the finish line if you want it to compete with this. Number 56, Barbaric Roar. That alternate R2 animation has become all reliable in so many of my strength builds. My only large grievance here is that it still counts as a weapon buff, which means it'll overwrite Grease's weapon buff spells like Scholar's Armament and the like, despite it having a very clear body buff visual effect, which can get incredibly confusing. The alternate heavy attack animation comprises multiple hits that suffer no status fall off, making it pretty stupid on claw builds and just about any status affinity weapon you can think of. It grants hyper armor equal to 300 poise during the charged heavy, so unless you're squaring off with a cement truck or something, it's gonna go through no matter what. Number 55, Ross's Summons. Another Eruption situation with this one. It managed to sneak into the big leagues slowly and patiently over time with various favors, increased animation speed, hyper armor, the whole kit and caboodle. It has zero utility outside of a shitload of fucks worth of damage, but it is capable of just over 4 times the strength of a normal R1 without even needing a boost from anything. It's absurdly easy to land thanks to the hyper armor it gets once the axe is in the air, and each skeleton bullet hits for around an R1's worth of damage. Poise included, adding up to 30 poise provided all 4 hits connect, and at only 15 FP, it's in the position of being one of the strongest and most reliable damage cannons in the business. Number 54, Blood Tax. Repeating thrust but I'm bad at the game seems a bit dishonest, but the incredibly strong lifesteal effect isn't the only attractive appendage dangling off this sword like a 12-inch... That sentence doesn't need to be finished. Not every thought you have needs to be a public event, Rusty. Fuck. Even with the damage being slightly reduced from repeating thrust, being a blood skill means it receives a pretty charitable attack bonus from Ansbach's attire, and giving this to something like the Great Katana with both innate bleed and bleed infusibility makes it teeter just on the brink of well, repeating thrust, but I'm bad at the game, I guess. Number 53, Starcaller Cry. Everything about this weapon skill just feels perfectly tailored to feel as nice as possible. The animations, the hyper armor, the gravity theme, the fact that it actually works how it's fucking expected to with talismans. I feel like I'm constantly underestimating the size of its pull hitbox and keep being surprised by the little twerp it manages to yank over from another zip code. The amount of damage on the follow-up slam is fucking nuts. You get a little extra damage reduction on the side during the slam animation. It's got so many little competitive edges helping it out and so many different encounters it can be good against that I really just don't mind spending 40 FP for a pneumatic hammer. I would take this skill over what the swords gave us in the DLC at any time, in any mindset. Now, where in the goddamn hell is our Star Scourge talisman? Bitches. Where is I'm not talking about the heirloom. I'm talking about a talisman that boosts gravity related skills. There isn't one in the game and there fucking needs to be. Or an armor set, I get. Fucking pick one. It needs to be in there somewhere. I don't care. Number 52, Frenzy Flame Thrust. Fire damage, low FP, looks cool as shit, and it's accessible early game. What's not to like? Number 51, the Moray Swords Yokai's Dancing Blade. So funny story when I was doing research and looking up values for this one. So, you know Google's dumb fucking AI secretary or something that types up shitty responses to whatever you search for? Well, I finally got one that took the wind completely out of my sails to such an extent that I had to pace around my office for 5 minutes trying to register it. So here's what it said, sourcing directly from Google's AI. Yokai's Dancing Blade is a unique skill in Elden Ring that can be used with the Moray Executioner's Sword and the Regalia of Yokai. The skill involves throwing the sword forward telekinetically and spinning it to hit enemies 7 times, dealing 35% of the weapon's attack power each hit, totaling to 245% of the weapon's attack power. All of this is correct so far. After the sword returns to the wielder's hand, it hits for 82% of the weapon's attack power and then slashes diagonally for 95%, totaling to 422% of the weapon's attack power for the entire skill. The amazing part is that every bit of this paragraph is completely correct. Right before starting a second paragraph, claimed to have been cited from the exact same sources, by the way, that says this: the skill requires 15 FP, and in parentheses, fingerprints, and is not chargeable. It is an Ash of War skill, which means it can be found as a drop or obtained through other means in the game. I don't even need to check what it's sourced. As God is my witness, not one article, walkthrough, or any single piece of media has ever mistakenly called FP fingerprints. Number 50, Ordovis's Vortex. A fully charged Vortex can hand out 66 poise damage. Holy of a fuck. If you're using a stone bar build, pocket whatever you've been using and just start using this instead. I don't care what it is. Ordovis is your god now and your ass better not be late to church. I haven't seen much that can force a stagger once you start charging it up. I assume a golden hippo on a workout regiment can pack enough wallop to flinch you out of the animation, but the game's multitude of commoners and various punching bags have all but signed a death warrant upon deciding it's time for an ambush because you just will not move. Can't be parried, has split damage that doesn't suck. The list of benefits are endless. Lack of holy damage doesn't make it the greatest weapon for undead encounters, but Last Rites can fix that problem very quickly. Number 49, Dynast's Finesse. An unassuming show of mostly basic attack animations with very little glitz and glamour. Dodge backwards, poke, poke slash. Go home. Job's done. However, the numbers game is where its proficiency is the most visible. The initial dodge is not only very comfortable to use in all directions, it's also 40 frames long. That is 2/3 of a second. That is longer than an actual dodge. Even the distance covered by the spin still services well enough as a dodge if you don't meet the stat benchmarks. Furthermore, 55 poise damage. 55 for the full combo. This is a heavy thrusting sword, by the way. Number 48, Ghost Flame Ignition. Now that the stained curse known only as Ghost Flame Call blights this timeline with its unfortunate existence, a newfound love has been discovered for Ghost Flame Ignition, at least for me. I really didn't know what I had when I had it. Misleading scaling aside, the R2 follow-up can still nail someone's ass with Frostbite numbering into the mid-2s, and the fact that over half the skill's damage comes directly from the status proc makes me feel like the misleading intelligence scaling, honestly, it's like, is it really that big of a deal? This sort of thing can be a big deal on other weapons that don't have status helping it out, but on Death's Poker, it can't be denied that leveling any relevant stat will give you all the damage you need from it. So as long as you're successfully hitting a target with the status, I'm perfectly okay with saying I just don't give a fuck how misleading the scaling is. Number 47, Spinning Guillotine. I don't mind risking a herniated disc or 5 if it means I never have to deal with Fire Knight dagger spam again in my whole life. But spinning guillotine is equally oppressive against weak knees and anything that hates frostbite. Granted, I've only seen the frostbite actually proc like 10% of the time, because whoever's on the wrong end of it usually dies very quickly. I think I'm mostly just surprised they even remember creating Orphan of Cause, because that shit was like 10 years ago and the boss music is still living rent-free in my fucking head. My only advice is to use this with a Viridian Tear or some sort of stamina regen boost, because if you're spamming the skill, you will run out of stamina long before you're short on anything else. Number 46, the Coated Sword's Unblockable Blade. Fuck shields and fuck knees. This sword hates them both. Every little advantage on the sword is obviously going to carry over to the skill itself, so enjoy the improved boost from holy damage buffs like Sacred Scorpion and Holy Shrouding Tear due to this sword not having split damage. Also, 30 poise damage is pretty radical on an attack with this amount of speed and range, but being completely unblockable gives it decent counterability against Crucible Knights and deals strangely high damage to them considering their holy resistance. It's already way too good against single targets, but it's best used against enemy encampments with a couple knights equipped with great shields. Under those circumstances, this almost feels like a little miniature wave of gold. Like everything immediately in front of you just fucking falls over. Number 45, the Reduvia Bloodblade. Deciding between damage, status, and staying physically healthy is no longer necessary. The Reduvia Bloodblade has been on top for a long time for what I personally think is a very bullshit reason. The HP loss is just completely gone, which sounds insignificant, but helps tremendously with spamming over a sustained amount of time. It was already one of the better skills against even bosses with notably high bleed resistance, but the addition of the Ansbach set and the bonus associated with it has given this dagger a frightening amount of staying power. I was hoping better bleed options would come around from the DLC, but all it's really done is just further cement the classics as the true monsters. Number 44, Ice Spear. Going on about the absurdly high magic damage or nearly instantaneous poise break it can trigger on most normal enemies like Black Knights when performed up close, there's a different avenue I would like to take with my selling approach to this Ash, and that is a very specific and noticeable uptick in general motherfuckery that comes with attaching this to a Clayman's Harpoon. There is no single weapon better suited to receive it. The additional frostbite buildup supplied by the cold infusion allows this skill to compete with Ronnie's fucking Dark Moon at 265 total buildup, including the weapon hit at the beginning. If you're just after straight up damage, it's probably better to go with the magic infusion since it gives the Ash more to scale with, but I really don't think you can do any wrong with the cold infusion because you get plenty of damage from the buildup and the subsequent defense reduction anyways, and it just makes for an outstanding introduction to the top shelf. Number 43, Waves of Darkness. There's Onyx Lord's Repulsion, and then there's Estelle's Get the Goddamn Holy Hell Away From Me. My main complaint with this one is an aesthetic nitpick because I really wanted a charged variant to create 4 waves so that it would be more similar to the actual attack executed by Estelle, but the very bad-mannered delay on the 3rd wave I'd say is comeuppance enough. I'm fine with it. Despite the low verticality of the visual effect, the hitbox itself establishes one of the safest no-fly zones of any skill, and it's one of the funnest ways to just guarantee that you won't take damage for the next 4 to 5 seconds. Number 42, Golden Vow. More damn damage for you, less damn damage to you. Want anything else? Then cram it up your shut the fuck and play a different game or something. Pulls less weight than the incantation, but the casting speed blows its balls out of the water, making it significantly easier to recast in a pinch. It's one of the only aura buffs that give you both more attack power and more damage negation, and since it's an aura buff, it'll stack with almost anything. It's Golden Vow. Number 41, Mesmer's Assault. Just good is the best and only description I think it needs. It's very rare that a skill this cinematic and flashy manages to actually cash in on what it promises. Just speedbag the shit out of that L2 and you'll be clearing out rooms in 5 seconds flat and looking sexy as fuck doing it. Number 40, Mikola's Rings of Light. If the only negative bullet point I can think of for over 5 minutes of raw brain power is that the rings occasionally get caught on walls if you're stupid enough to swing this inside the perimeter of a New York apartment, then I think this skill is in amazingly good shape. This was one of the few weapon skills that was able to challenge the whole holy damage is bad stereotype all the way back before the DLC DLC existed. It's easily spammable despite the range actually being very versatile since its tracking allows it to slam into something right in front of you. It's not too bad on the FP reserves, and both the ring and the scythe swing have decent flinching power, meaning there's pretty much no standard enemy that can stand against it. And with the addition of all the bothersome leftover assets that are weak to holy damage dumped into the DLC, this one becomes an outstanding option for dispatching ghost flame dragons and deathbirds. Number 39, Glint Blade Phalanx. This is not a rich man's glintstone pebble. They are, in fact, neighbors in the same socio-economic class with no interest in competing with one another. And the glintstone pebble should feel very lucky this is the case, because this ash not only races far past 2 of the 3 sorcery phalanx variants in terms of both poise break and FP efficiency, but comes close to threatening the crown of Carian phalanx, which is usually only preferred due to its higher damage ceiling. Putting this on a great spear or an HTS means your poise break to FP ratio is essentially 3 to 1, delivering 42 poise damage in total while only using 14 FP. God damn it, talk about a blowout sale. Sam Walton would shit his pants and change his sheets after hearing a deal that ludicrous. Number 38, Prayerful Strike. Probably the closest we will ever get to Miyazaki just saying, "Here, you deserve a break," and then handing us a booklet of cheat codes. Multipurpose doesn't even properly explain the amount of ground this covers. This bitch is a Swiss Army knife inside a Swiss Army knife. It would be like if an internationally famous surgeon was also trained as a sniper and knew how to mod Elden Ring. 235 attack MV, 600 poise MV, compatible with colossal weapons, hyper armor of Senator Armstrong himself, 30% max HP heal upon hitting an enemy. It is so immensely difficult to make this thing bad in any context. I don't think it could be done. There's too many different perks you get out of it. You could whack a bird with this and the HP restoration effect would still proc off of it and it would just be like hitting with a shitty flask or something. I legitimately think the only way you could make this bad would be to intentionally just spike it into the fucking floor. Number 37, Crag Blade. I've already told you plenty of times why it's good. I've devoted so many brain cells to properly and vividly, sometimes comedically, describing the interminable volumes of ass you can smack with nothing but a club of rocks, but on rare occasions, it's more than enough to just say you need help if you're ignoring this. From a wiki page, from a therapist, maybe both. Crag Blade has become a staple in PvP just because if your opponent has a shield, then no they fucking don't. The physical attack power doesn't even need to be there for it to be a solid niche buff against shielders and for poise breaking, but it's there anyways, and the FP cost is surprisingly cheap for its duration. I'm sure I could turn that into a gooning joke if I wanted to, but Lord knows the one thing I'm not keen on is wasting your time. Just one small problem. The FP expense triggers as you thrust the weapon into the ground, but the buff doesn't get applied until after you pull it back out from the ground, which can sometimes lead to unfortunate wastes of FP in critical moments. Number 36, Flaming Strike. The staying power of this ash is driven solely by how multifaceted it is. It's fast, it's fire, it hurts like shit, deals decent poise damage, and it gives you a 40-second buff as a parting gift. This scope of versatility makes this ash incredibly easy to build around, and being both a multi-input attack and a buff makes this one of the game's main beneficiaries of just knowing how the fuck talismans work. Once you start learning the inner workings of how the game treats certain buffs, damage types, and you just become more experienced with the game, Flaming Strike has this addictive power to it that's really difficult to let go of once you know how to crank it. Number 35, Barricade Shield. Well, whoever the shit Sir Neidhart was, I'd like to commence a deep dive into his candidacy for Elden Lord, because this guy absolutely had Melania's number. It works even better since the infamous Great Shield flattening of 1.14, the halving of FP cost from the Carian Filigreed, and the allowance of FP regen thanks to Blessed Blue Dew, and you can now just have a steel wall on permanent standby. Also, tier 4 hardness means anything that isn't a literal dragon will just bounce right off your shit like they just bitch slapped an electric fence. Number 34, Swift Slash. In average hands, it's still just free damage, but its performance is vastly accelerated in the capable hands of someone who knows how to turn this into a human rights violation by playing the distance game with the Smith Script Circ. The reason putting this on the Smith Script Circ is so important is because you have access to a ranged R2 and a distance closer attack, all in a single weapon, in addition to backhand blades already having one of the highest DPS ceilings up close to begin with. I'm loath to call this out, but I honestly think think it needs to be. FromSoft and the community they've accumulated over the years have become two sides of the same coin. They sledgehammer nerf certain aspects of gameplay so frequently that sometimes, when a tiny bit of that pressure is applied to an aspect of the game that desperately needs it, an entire subculture of people suddenly can't stop talking about how useless it is now. You are both wrong, and a couple other things I probably can't say on YouTube. The distance when charging it is still nuts. Free aiming gives it a ton of directional flexibility, making it both efficient at single target and crowd damage. The vacuum blades can still accumulate status on affinity weapons. You clear the same amount of distance charging it with FP, and landing the first hit still true combos into the vacuum slash. Number 33, the Ancient Lightning Spear. Pretty fucking good. You ever shot a cannon before? You know how a taser works? If your answer was no on both accounts, you are hereby cordially invited to the Lanedell shooting range, also known as Lanedell. Nothing but to live here. Please exterminate them all. This one gets its power from both weapon level and an added bonus of scalable lightning damage on the side, allowing it to ascend to heights just shy of one-shot ability on pure dex builds. Everyone who doesn't get the hype has forgotten about how good it is, everyone who hates it just doesn't use it, and everyone who likes it uses it frequently enough to know firsthand how easy the game suddenly gets once you tune a build around it. It's a giant missile of red lightning. You tell me how good you think it is. Number 32, Stormcaller. The outrageously high damage combined with its ability to give even small bosses an all-expense-paid trip to Stunlock Purgatory are already two impressive bullet points by themselves. But you can unlock this Weapon Ash's final limit break by watching what it can do when it's on a Great Hammer. Great Hammers are already one of the best weapon classes for poise break builds, but the Stormcaller's 840 poise MV when executing the full 3-input combo gives this Ash a ludicrously overtuned 67 in its final poise damage, meaning if you've performed this skill to completion and something isn't currently picking its own legs up off the ground, then it might be time for you to take a break and play another game for a while. Number 31, Great Oracular Bubble. Out of the way, places to be, move it, the dirty bubble from SpongeBob is late to work and he needs to deliver these 2 piping hot pumpkin spice lattes to his bitch manager fast. It doesn't have that much poise damage going for it, but it only costs 16 FP. It comes equipped with a state-of-the-art magnetic system that surgically attaches itself to the ass of your targets, and it holds a downright biblical level of malice for anything that's undead, which fittingly resembles the religious pilgrimage you have to go on just to get the fucking weapon. The only problem is one I'm sure is completely unintended since it comes about as a direct result of the speed buff, which is that it's now more likely to miss against targets who are smart enough to move the hell out of the way. But no undead target is that intelligent to my knowledge, so you should be pretty fine. Number 30, Euphoria Vortex. Remember the first 2 weeks when this game came out and all of us thought Comet Azure was a fast track to the end credits? And then we all collectively left it in our rear view once we realized this weapon skill was basically just that, but prettier and allowed directional adjustment? I mean, that's only a half joke. I don't think that comparison is completely honest, since Comet Azure can be held down indefinitely, and Euphoria Vortex needs to be charged up with basic attacks first. But I think the shining green flag for this skill in particular is just how long it can hold the charge you've accumulated from basic attacks. Once the luster activates, it is fully yours for 30 seconds. No need to get too excited and explode this all over someone too early. Just wait till their knees pop and then fill them right up and tell them to have a nice day. And it's also built around an accumulator system, which is the same effect used on the Winged Sword talismans. So as long as you play even somewhat aggressively, that sparkle is gonna stick with you till the end of time. Number 29, Braggart's Roar. If you ever catch me in a Discord somewhere talking about shotgun buffs and the amount of disdain I tend to show them, just remind me I ranked this one where I did and enjoy your on-the-house salad of cool points. Braggart's Roar has single-handedly taken that narrative, served it to me as a nice juicy blueberry pie, and then just RKO'd my shit right into it. This self-righteous biggity bitch has the chutzpah to stack with itself. Not affected by Shard of Alexander, but I guess then again, how would it be? It only improves the heavy attacks when two-handing a weapon, which isn't that important if you're aiming to take advantage of the whole double buffage thing. But those two-handed heavies start brandishing some serious firepower on claws and fist weapons. Doubly so on status affinities. Speaking strictly on the yelling your nuts off subgenre of weapon ashes, this one is just about the greatest you can get. Number 28, Endure. You like not taking taking damage? You like thrusting your body weight into the ground like you're trying to dig post holes for your neighbor's shitty garden? I've always liked the slight difference in animations this one gives you depending on what weapon you've attached it to. They're all functionally the same and with the same frame, so none of them come out any quicker than the other or anything. I always thought it was a cool detail how if you're holding a hammer, then you're thrusting it into the ground, and then there's this other cool one that makes you look like you're doing shinobi hand signs from Naruto and shit. I don't know, I mean, sometimes it's the little things. Number 27, Flame Spear. This one comes with a tremendous advantage on larger weapons that I don't think a lot of people really consider, which is the animation speed on larger weapons. Looking at each animation separately, using this with a colossal sword doesn't seem to affect animation speed like it usually would. This makes a Flame Art Fire Knight's Greatsword the single most potent beneficiary of this detail. Your poise damage can rocket into the mid-40s on a colossal sword if the entire thing connects properly, but the ranged application of the spear projectile also hands out immense fire damage when charged, and that's in addition to the extra 95 flat fire damage it gives you on the weapon buff, and the projectile can pierce enemies. And the FP cost is mitigated by Blue Dew, one of the most unequivocally torqued abilities in the whole game, and you give it to a man named Kood. Go fuck yourself. Number 26, Siluria's Woe. This manages to surprise at least one person every time I talk about it because no one ever expects this skill to be the war crime that it is. Anything either gold or tornadic usually gets shafted by a multitude of balance decisions that leave it pretty clearly behind most other options. So going by that trend, I should be using this skill to blow the leaves around the Lanedale County Park, but not so. In true Crucible Knight fashion, it leaves zero room for finesse or misinterpretation. Nothing is lost in translation from a massive yellow hurricane being savagely shoved down someone's blasphemous mouth. Number 25, Red Bear Hunt. Just plain old fucking disgusting is what this one is. Claw weapon, bleed, multiple hitboxes, low FP cost, high poise damage on the full combo, got buffed in 1.13 for some reason, and the inconveniently short range nobody gives a shit about because everything else is too good that it's easy to ignore. It's also not really fair to say it's a weakness of the skill since it's really just a weakness of the weapon type itself. If you went to see a movie in a theater but the guy behind you was violently ripping ass every 15 minutes, it would make for a lesser experience, sure, but you wouldn't say the movie was bad. Does this metaphor make sense? I've been sitting on this one for a while. Number 24, Surge of Faith. You've heard of Nihil, now get ready for his little cousin. Nuh-uh. There was never a single time in this game's life cycle where this was bad, but it's somehow been the recipient of two buffs both in 1.07 and 1.09 that boosted its attack power and projectile quantity that have fine-tuned it into a 16-cylinder crankshaft of a weapon skill. I have absolutely nothing more to say about it. If you haven't used this for some reason, then you're just fucking stupid. I'm perfectly okay with saying that. Number 23, Bloodblade Dance. Whatever I said for the Reduvia Bloodblade is just gonna be a big ol' fucking ditto. It was already capable of barbaric amounts of damage and status with very little room for anything to stagger you out of it, but Ansbach's attire has boosted this weapon skill into territory that could be considered egregious by some, and by some I mean me. It doesn't work with some of the common boosting talismans like Godfrey Icon since it can't be charged, or the Roar Medallion despite me yelling my nuts off as an exclamation to the damage that I'm doing, but I can't really think of any obvious reason not to use it. Any Asher skill listed from this point forward won't really have negatives or consequences that come with using them. No glaring shortcomings or obvious missteps to their cadence, just things that make them not as ridiculously torqued as their competitors. This is about to become a theme extremely quickly, and it will not stop until the video is finished. Number 22, Dragon Wound Slash. The 20% damage boost against both types of dragons makes it the perfect anti-Drake repellent no matter what New Game Plus cycle you're in, and the projectile range and hyper armor make it suited perfectly for fighting and tanking hits from dragons, which is something I'm kinda just really impressed they even thought to include. But this great katana's target audience being something as big as a dragon also enables you to kinda just kill whatever the hell you want with it, because the slash projectile is still absurdly strong even without the 20% boost. Number 21, Sword Dance. You've heard of Unga Bunga, now get ready for bullshit. A load of goddamn bullshit with tons of hyper armor, cracked attack MVs, incredibly low FP cost, and all while covering the distance of an entire master bedroom. It has no delay between attacks on smaller armaments, making it faster than most R1 chains. The delay on larger weapons is noticeable, but it's not really as considerable as it probably should be. It can fit onto any weapon that isn't considered colossal. The hyper armor allows you to trade with said colossals. The motion values equate to around 400% in total, give give or take a little, depending on what weapon type you're using, and using it without FP only really forgoes the stagger values on each hit. You still get around 3 times a normal R1, which is extremely important on heavier weapons since not a lot of speed is lost, and it still ends up being way faster than an R1 chain anyways. Make no mistake, this is a titan of deceptively unassuming strength. This is just a standard "we have McDonald's at home" joke, but if your father is Chef fucking Ramsay and you get to dine on white truffles every night while you're doing your homework. Number 20, Thunderbolt. There is one small downside to casting this repeatedly, and that comes with its problematic line of sight that requires a full and open straight line from you directly to the enemy that you're targeting. If a single unexpected entity steps in the way of this line, if a goddamn fruit fly just so happens to dick around in the wrong space and intersect this LOS, the bullet will not target correctly and instead just zap whatever it collides with first. This is but a small needle in a splendiferous ocean of advantages with attack power that tightrope walks the border between overclocked and just downright fucking unreasonable. Find a parrying dagger, turn it into a magic wand with some keen, and enjoy surgically removing half the game from your file space. Number 19, Bloodhound Step. Okay, so a step implies that I have relocated myself a negligible amount of distance to another, more convenient space in the room. I will perhaps need even 2 or 3 steps to reach my preferred location. This is not a step. This is an evacuation. This is for when the room is on fire and everyone needs to leave. It covers a distance so ridiculously massive that it hard counters almost everything that's considered difficult in the base game, and at least half of what's considered difficult in the DLC. A step? This is a full tilt sprint. This is a potentially dangerous level of velocity that should come with its own set of turn signals. Number 18, Discus Hurl. By strict definition, there is really no such thing as free damage in this game. Even the freest of handouts come at the price of your personal integrity. But hanging outside aggro range, concussing everyone with a magic shield becomes such an easy way to play through the entire game that if I'm to make a single exception to the rule, I think it would be this. I'm not sure a lot of people know this, but the advanced targeting system found in this shield was actually a precursor to most modern day aviation. Those SR-71s ought to respect where they fucking came from. It even tricks enemies into dodging the upward swing of the shield and not the subsequent forward flying bullet that actually does the damage. I don't think it can miss. I've never seen it happen unless I'm just flinging it into a wall specifically so that it can miss. Oh, and it's only 3 FP, so with Blue Dew, you can toss it up and then wait 5 or 6 seconds and it'll be like nothing ever happened. Number 17, Seppuku. You know what? I should have rated this higher last time. Just a big ol' sandwich of shitty vibes and poor balancing decision. Actually, no, that's a misrepresentation. The balancing is fine. Without a single doubt anywhere in the vacuity of my brain folds, they have absolutely tried to make this balanced, and it just doesn't want to listen. And I think that's because of how it synergizes with the White Mask and the Blood Exaltation Talisman. Having such a powerful buff tied to such a powerful status ailment should require a high amount of setup before you start benefiting from it, which is an element of play Seppuku just removes entirely. You want a fat-ass attack bonus salad and an extra 15% HP's worth of damage? Why not just have both and scamper through the game in a blaze of sanguine malignancy like the vermin-adjacent douche crater you know you are? Fuck you. Number 16, Shadow Sunflower Headbutt. There's poise, there's hyper armor, and then there's whatever divine intervention witchcraft fuck shit that helps you during this animation. The toughness ID is marked as toughness 3, which is similar to other skills like Shriek of Milos and Surge of Faith. If you don't know what toughness 3 is, the only things that can actually flinch your character once you start casting it are attacks capable of throwing you backwards, which are dragons and like 2 or 3 other things, maybe. If something cancels the cast on this, it probably just killed the shit out of you. Even in base game areas, this can effortlessly soar up to 5-digit damage. You just need 1 or 2 buffs and a general disregard for your own safety that facilitates you landing the entire combo no matter what. If I was a soldier in this game and somebody came at me with this oversized Mother's Day gift, I would shit the pants of the entire platoon, because this weapon carries with it the terrifying lack of self-preservation of its user and the power that comes with it. This is just Elden Ring's final gambit. Roll up with this shit and start smacking the floor, somebody's gonna die. Number 15, Flower Dragon Bolt. Okay, fine. You win, Lightning. Fire can just go fuck itself now, officially. This unique skill right here was the exact tipping point where Lightning just bent fire over the table and paddled his ass like a hazing ritual. If you lean on fan favorite zappers like Thunderbolt or Ancient Lightning Spear, or you have a craving to violate some rights laws with Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, this skill comes with a unique debuff that just heightens that shit by another 23%. You don't even need to meet the requirements to cast it either. The damage becomes garbage, but if you're only using it for the debuff, that still gets applied like normal. It also scales with Arcane, making it a perfect match for Bale's Flame Lightning, and because the DLC made so many abrupt and wacky scaling decisions that the amount of food in my fridge probably contributes to some in-game damage that I didn't know about. Number 14, Unsheath. Katanas are bullshit. I know. Bravery is not a skill we're all born with, but I'm willing to say it. Little did people know at the very beginning, katana builds were not only capable of status and unfair damage, but proudly sported a hidden kneecapper ability no one knew about until entire months later. That Stance R2 slaps bitches over the head with 30 poise damage. 30 poise damage on a fuck-mothering katana. I don't even know how much hyper armor it has because the animation plays out so fast that I just never need to think about it. The attack MVs are also 190 and 245 for the respective light and heavy, and in the company of Rolana's cameo, standard katanas commonly used for status can now double as casting sticks. Saying katanas are bullshit is the safest take you could possibly champion in this game's player base, but if you've ever wondered why, a lot of it has to do with this right here. And status, I guess. Status is also a pretty big reason. Number 13, Unending Dance. I'm not going to bother listing out all the MVs for this one because it seems to be a repeated variation of roughly 3 or so of the same attacks. But I also think I should emphasize just what little importance these motion values have for figuring out why this skill slaps the enormity of ass that it does. I just want to focus on these two right here and we can just ignore everything else. Having a stagger value of 2 in an attack chain literally designed to never end means as long as your FP and stamina are both decently filled, you can just plug in that Vitamix and churn your target's atoms into a fucking protein smoothie. Toss in Viridian Tier and a high poise armor set, and you'll be clumsily dancing your way to Radant's front door like you're auditioning for Magic Mike. Number 12, White Light Charge. You know that trope in old cartoons where someone attaches jet engines to their roller skates, but then they forget to take the skates off, so they just end up blasting themselves through a wall? This is just that trope, but like with a Zweihander. I think it's funny to imagine this skill accidentally starting some in-game arms race because a bunch of Black Knights saw someone use this sword and started researching propulsion systems they could put on their spears. It allows colossal sword builds to completely ignore their lack of mobility. It's a thrust, it's an AoE, and it deals 36 poise damage provided both hits connect. The split arcane scaling even helps out the skill too. In fact, it probably helps out way more than intended. Number 11, Blink Bolt Long-Hafted Axe. The Death Knight Long-Hafted Axe has enjoyed 5-star first-class treatment in my main arsenal since June of whenever the fucking DLC came out. Too lazy to look it up. Last year, June 2024. Why did that demand thought processing power for me? What the fuck? And almost all of that enjoyment can be contributed to the all-purpose tour de force atom bomb of a unique skill. No utility, no greater goal or hidden motive behind its back. This is the kind of ability you resort to when you're just tired of fucking fighting shit. If I use a standard Ash on most weapons, I'm gonna get some ball-gargling bullshit 1k damage unless it's under the right conditions, and I'm fighting the right enemies, and the build also needs to have the right talismans and the right buffs. Or I can just make whoever dares oppose me eat my wedged 8-foot-long golden dragon pecker and then saunter across the recipient's corpse like I'm enjoying a Sunday jog on the way to my fucking grandmother's house, because that's the difficulty level of the rest of this game once you pick this up. Number 10, Stormblade. You guys remember those shitty air Zuka cannons you could buy from Amazon for like 30 bucks? Well, the lads at Stormveil Incorporated have found a way to weaponize it, and now it started showing up in modern warfare documentaries on National Geographic. I haven't seen vacuum blasts this deadly since I was watching Spike TV during my adolescence. It can travel in a straight line, and it can be cast repeatedly, so anything even tangentially related to a magic build in this game can already get the hell over itself. But the fact that this weapon Ash has never once received its own dedicated nerf makes comboing this with the Enraged Beast Talisman just that much more powerful. Most other storm-related abilities were negatively adjusted in some way to compensate for the 10% damage boost of the talisman, but Stormveil's t-shirt cannon is given the privilege of free free reign in a system that oppressively bottlenecks everything else in its proximity. Number 9, Wild Strikes. I can't even call this spam because that would insinuate you're pressing the button repeatedly and not holding it down. You want to play the game, but you also want to eat your 1,300 calorie shit steak sandwich you just DoorDashed a half hour ago? No problem. With Wild Strikes, you can do both at the same time. There are no trolley problems with Wild Strikes, no philosophical dilemmas, no need to think about task priority or some shit. With Wild Strikes on my side, I could balance a fucking checkbook and play this game at the same time. That follow-up heavy on a Great Hammer just drops 42 poise damage right in the lap of your least favorite mob. I'm not even giving you the rest of the numbers. What do you need math for? I'm telling you it's good, and so are like millions of other people. Just go use it. Number 8, Wing Stance. Fuck you. Let me put it on heavy thrusting swords, or regular thrusting swords, or just standard ass straight swords if you're gonna be a picky bitch about it. It wouldn't have been hard to do, and straight swords are perfectly capable of a thrusting moveset anyways. So it's not like it would have been out of place or something. Why did you give one of the best stanced weapon ashes to a single weapon class that only contains 3 weapons, one of which are actually infusible? In case it wasn't obvious, I've taken a more lax approach to the criteria of ranking skills that only really pay attention to performance and nothing else. And Wing Stance here should consider itself lucky that decision was made, because this dainty fussy little bitch can only be equipped to one sword found only in the DLC, yet its stopping power rivals a black hole that envelops all that touches it, up to and including the brain cells of its user. It's like a skin-eating super virus, but it can only affect penguins or some shit. Number 7, Revenger's Blade. It's swift slash without the bullshit, yet it somehow ends up being more bullshit. There, now I've pissed everyone off. The weapon's passive 55 bleed is more immovable than the fucking pyramids, but that follow-up R2 after the dash hands out so many slaps that whatever its final damage is might as well just include a bleed proc. I've seen this skill connect with over 10k damage against pretty much anything with a functioning cardiovascular system, and the directional control given to it by 1.13 was just the tuning it needed to become a machination of pure terror. Number 6, Moonlight Greatsword. For every journalist lacking integrity that points out Elden Ring's lack of difficulty options and frames it under the guise of supporting accessibility, there's another person who likens the entire journey to the difficulty of a 2-piece jigsaw puzzle because a glow stick exists. Both groups are what I like to call, stupid. Stupid as hell. But weapons and weapon skills like these are what facilitate that dichotomy. You can't play the number game with this one. No justice will be done with that analysis. 65 magic damage and 15 extra frostbite is some piss water when comparing it to skills like Ruinous Ghost Flame and Ice Lightning Sword, but the projectiles on the R2 attacks hold the key to heightening this bitch so far through the perceivable atmosphere that it started to choke due to lack of oxygen. Axe Talisman, Alexander, Spell Blade, Magic Scorpion, Terra Magic... hey, Luna, can you bring out that animation I never get tired of using again? Yep, that'll do. That'll do. Thank you very much. Slapping somebody's ass with a charged R2 is still one of the most consistent ways to ice cube your enemies even after the DLC, and it's one of the only weapons in the lore's legendary armament lineup that actually earns its moniker and then some. Number 5, Magma Guillotine. I think the most impressive part about the guillotine is that it somehow managed to not receive any significant nerfs or buffs over the entirety of its lifespan in the game. All of its ups and downs across the meta landscape have been the result of indirect buffs brought forth by shit like the Dread Talisman. The only direct change I could find involved a slight increase in poise damage that came from 1.07, which, in case no one remembers, could have been marketed as its own DLC with all the adjustments it made. The damage is just stupid. I can't even think of a joke for this part. Running this with Alexander and Dread Talisman just doesn't even feel like Elden Ring anymore. It feels like Elden Ring came with its own Marvel rival style training room where you just kick the shit out of idle targets for 15 minutes because you're bored. Number 4, Palm Blast. Charging Palm Blast gives the player a toughness param ID of 220, which is, just one second, fuckloads. That's a toughness 4, so ain't nothing getting through that shit. That's on par with Endure and Iron Jar Aromatic, so if you somehow find a way to get flinched out of this, then I guess you just suck. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. This might be the single highest poise modifier given to you by any offensive skill. It's like relegating Endure to an auto ability that just times itself with when you're charging it. Doesn't come with damage negation, but why the fuck are you gonna need that? Whatever you're pointing this at is gonna have his knees blown out through his chest like someone stuffed him in a school locker, so that just shouldn't be a concern. How is something like this on a fist weapon? Not even a fist weapon, it's just your own bare hands. And it has access to a weapon ash that wins trades with fucking dragons. Number 3, Taker's Flames. It's fucking Taker's Flames. You already know what this one does. I remember saying somewhere in one of my first ever Elden Ring videos that I thought the Blasphemous Blade was underrated because it just seemed like everyone was too busy whipping around tainted blood and tossing moon crescents up everyone's ass. But retroactively, I don't think there was ever a single day the Blasphemous Blade, and specifically the Taker's Flames unique skill, wasn't in some kind of spotlight. It proudly owns one of the lowest skill floors in the game while also being privileged with one of the highest damage ceilings, a pair of red flags that are effectually synonymized with the piss-filled diapers of most of its users. If Taker's Flames had its own card in a TCG, it would be one of the first to ever get banned in tournaments. It would be such a scorched earth ban that facilities would have their own security that checked everyone's cards at the door. Patrons in the crowd would be tackled to the ground if they whipped this out like it was a threat to public safety. If Magma Guillotine was equal to summoning Exodia, this would just be reaching across the table and punching your opponent in the fucking mouth.
Sweet dreams.
Well, it's come to this. 70 pages of literary floundering has brought us to the ultimate culmination of war. A battle between then and now. The bullshit of today versus the bullshit of yesterday. And even though the choice here might seem obvious, a straightforward comparison between these two skills came out way closer than I would have ever imagined. I do not exaggerate or shit around when I say that this was a photo finish. So, you know how almost every enemy and boss in Elden Ring has a magic resistance that's either just enough or it's like absurdly high for some reason? Would you like to know why those resistances are the way they are? Allow me to explain. The magic damage type, and moreover the style of combat it's associated with, is not really good at anything. It can't heal you, its lineup of support abilities is underwhelming on the best of days, it doesn't really have any notable interactions with the world like how the wet state affects fire and lightning damage, while also not being considered a specialty damage type like the holy element. It can't reset status like fire, it can't one-shot revenants like healing incantations, and its linchpin status ailment doesn't even scale with anything. And that's because the one thing magic damage is good at is killing shit. Skills and spells in the magic damage lineup comprise the ultimate combination of damage, range, and spammability that ensure you can plug your target as quickly as possible and without being in harm's way. Even with the DPS of Catch Flame being as cranked as it is, Night Comet and Carian Slicer just leapfrog right over that shit. Whenever you're comparing similar sources of different elemental damage, magic always seems to get just a little bit more. This is the central driving component of Carian's sovereignty. It's a shitload of damage that happens in a convenient amount of time. Bloodboon Ritual obviously wins out in the damage department, but that's usually due to an extra bleed proc that slams its way into the final damage number. If not for this, the total damage actually ends up being very similar between the two. They have the exact same toughness ID during their wind-ups, but Bloodboon also needs 18 more FP to fully cast, in addition to a longer animation that leaves you more vulnerable, especially against large targets that can still break through the hyper armor. Carian Sovereignty also wins the poise race pretty decisively, since charging it can amp its final poise damage into the 80s. Any boss with 80 poise, Death Knights, Elamers, Knights Cavalries, Morgott, Melania, this heavyweight champion two-taps them all. However, even considering Bloodboon Ritual's nerf from 1.12 decreasing its overall status buildup, successfully connecting with all attacks results in a total bleed buildup of 690, and even more so if you're less than 4 meters away from the target. Despite all that it asks from the player, pulling this out still commands a frightening authority over your immediate vicinity that is just not seen on any other skill in the game. And it is with an incredibly heavy heart and with great reluctance that I crown Bloodboon Ritual as King of Castle Miyazaki. Congratulations, we are all very tired of seeing this happen, and I can say with the utmost confidence that this spear could have been given the full Katara treatment, and I would not have given a single shit. I hope it happens, actually.
You really have forgotten. someone has poisoned your memories, meddled with your sense of self. Allow me to restore it. To open the door is to accept what's behind it. This cannot be undone. Kingdoms will wither, stars will disappear, and time itself will bend to our clock. In a blink, tomorrow will stand still, and we will wait for nothing.